Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff this week on the show. We are talking more Doctor Who, because there was a new episode, so we're going to do that. We're also going to talk about some other things. I saw the movie First Man. I'm going to mention that. We've both been playing Dragon Quest XI. I've been watching some Dragon Ball, and I want to talk about that. There's been some news out of Microsoft and Sony and everybody else, so lots of different things we're going to talk about today. What did you think of today's Doctor Who, Sean, in spoiler-free terms? We'll get to spoiler reviews later in the show.
Yeah, I definitely like it more than the last episode. It was one that, we talked about this briefly before we started recording. Right after I watched it, I was pretty good on it, of like, nah, I don't think it's a great episode of Doctor Who, but I was sort of like, yeah, I like that a bit. And then after, it sort of like sat with me a little bit, and I might have trouble actually talking about the episode because I feel like it's leaving my brain. Because it just, the story of the episode is like really kind of disjointed. And I think when you get to the end, it just kind of, it has that thing that I think most of Chris Chibnall's episodes have, where it's just like, it just kind of stops. And it doesn't feel like it's really culminated to a strong conclusion as a story. And that's something that is like, I've kind of soured on more in the like 3 or 4 hours since I watched it.
Okay. I liked it. I don't think it's a great episode, but it felt like a good, solid, competent episode of Doctor Who to me, and that's sort of what I wanted this week. I just wanted to see, like, can we do a normal Doctor Who outing and have it be, like, decently fun and engaging? And I was like, they did that. All right. It had a little more of what I think I wanted in the script out of giving Jodie Whittaker more shades to play. Mm-hmm. It did that a little bit with 2 of the 3 companions. One of the 3 companions is still a person, and that's all I can say about them.
You know, Yaz is there.
Yaz is there.
She contributes when it's appropriate.
Well, I hope we see more of Yaz. But yes, and I thought it built to a very good ending. I liked the last couple of minutes a lot. And yeah, I guess I just have lowered expectations in that, again, Chris Chibnall is not a guy who has shown himself to be a great writer of Doctor Who, particularly in the past. And so we're still kind of waiting for that. I think this is the best Doctor Who script he's ever written. It's a low bar, but I do like Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. Maybe I like Dinosaurs on a Spaceship more. We'll talk about that more later in our spoiler discussion. But that's our basic thoughts. It was an okay Doctor Who. The Doctor is still very good.
Yes.
So, all right. Let's move on to stuff. Sean, what have you been up to lately?
Dragon Quest XI, still. Okay. It's a big game. I have quote unquote finished the game. I've got that credit screen. I defeated Olnoga, or whatever the fuck he's called in your game. I don't know.
Mordegon.
Your weird fake version of Dragon Quest XI that you played. Because I have to say, I after I finished it, I think I forget what I was looking up. I was looking up something on the Wikipedia page, and I ended up out of the corner of my eye glancing something in the summary, and it was like utter fucking gobbledygook, because literally every single proper noun, I think except for Veronica's name, is different between the English and Japanese version. So it's every location name, every character name, like the title of your main character is the Luminary or something in the English version, I guess. All that shit made it utterly incomprehensible, and so that was a fun experience.
That's funny for me, because it's like the Luminary is such a like key word in the script I read that it's like, what do you mean it wasn't called the Luminary in Japanese? That's crazy.
Yeah, it's like, it's because he's just called the Yusha, which just basically means hero, and so it's a much more sort of like generic term in Japanese that like is used in that genre all the time. And so the Luminary thing, I was like, what the fuck are they talking about? It was like, if you like imagine, like take the script for Star Wars and like shuffle all the character names around and don't call them Jedi, but call them like, I don't know, like fighty dudes, and you're like, what the fuck is this? This is just utterly incomprehensible. But yeah, I finished the main fight in Dragon Quest XI. I did that on Friday, and I have not had time. I've been very busy this weekend, so I have not had time to really dig into the post-credit stuff, which I know is quite extensive. I know what it is.
You have no idea.
I've gone into it a little bit, and so I have like the gist of where you go with it, but I haven't really. There's a thing you do that like I saw that's like, okay, that's a big thing. I didn't do anything in the post-credits, so I was like, I'm going to load an older save, because I know there's other, like, story scenes I can see before I make this choice to go, like, actually do the post-game stuff. So I haven't really dove into it yet. But, yeah. Dragon Quest XI is great. Like, all my feelings about it that we've talked about on the past couple of podcasts have hold true throughout this whole latter section of the game. It's awesome.
It's awesome. I have finished Dragon Quest XI. I am, as in, I have gotten to the point where I feel like I am done playing it for now. It does not mean I will never play it again, but I have taken the disc out of my PS4, I have put it back in the box, and I've put the box on the shelf, so I feel like it is over for me at this point. There were a few more things I could have done, and I was trying to go for the platinum, but I got down to I had 2 trophies remaining, other than the beat the game trophy, you know? Yeah. And the 2 I had remaining, they seemed hard, and then I looked up, like, okay, now I'm going to get serious about these trophies, and it was, you're never going to get these trophies, Jonathan? You will never get them. And I'm like, oh, fuck, I wish I would have known that earlier. One of them is for getting achievements in the casino, and I'm sorry, I love Dragon Quest XI. I love Dragon Quest XI as much as just about any game I've ever played. The casino is the bridge too far for me in Dragon Quest XI of trying to figure that out, because you would have to be a professional gambler and then do hours and hours of study to figure out the algorithms going on in the fucking casino, because it is an act of profound insanity, and I respect Yuji Horii and the crew of Dragon Quest for that, but I cannot engage with that. It's just too much, and so I'm like, no, I'm out, and I need to do the casino stuff to get the other trophy, so I think for now it's going to be sitting at, I have all the trophies except 2. But I went ahead today, and about 3 hours ago, I finished it, no, less than that, I finished it about 6:30 my time. I rolled the credits again and beat the game permanently and saw everything, and it brought me back to the title screen, and I just felt inside like, that was beautiful, that was perfect. I think it ends on a stunningly good note, and I was just like, I think it's good for me now. And sometimes it's good to walk away while you're ahead, especially from a really, really big game, you know? Mm-hmm. And walk away when you feel like the story is finished for you. So while there's a couple, like, side quests still out in the world, I love the side quests in Dragon Quest XI. I did the vast, vast majority of them. Overall, I felt like, you know, I think this is a good moment to walk away. I logged 92 hours in the game, so I think that's enough. I think I've done it, and I love this game. I am sure we will talk about it many more times. When you feel like you are done and you have put it back on your shelf, we will do a full spoiler cast on the game, and I'm excited to do that. And we're going to talk about it on our year-end podcast, because it's going to be, at a minimum, very high for me. This is one of the best games I have played in my life, and I would say it is easily, without competition, the best JRPG I've played, not called Persona.
Okay.
And even then, I would put it above one of the 3 Personas I've played. So I think this is about as good as it gets. I recommend it highly. I just felt so much playing this goddamn game. And I also realized that I think, especially in the post-game, when the battle system really starts to get a workout, I realized just how good the battle system in Dragon Quest XI is. I think it's probably the best battle system I've ever engaged with in a JRPG, not because it's got a bunch of bells and whistles and is super creative and does all these crazy things, because it has this very simple, like, easy to learn, hard to master sort of thing to it, where 92 hours in, I was still realizing layers of depth in the interlocking, you know, move sets that all of your different characters have. It really does feel like one battle system that has been refined over 30 plus years, and there's no other JRPG battle system like that. You know, Final Fantasy 15 is not an iterative version of what Final Fantasy 1 did, and that's fine, but Dragon Quest 11 is an iterative version of what Dragon Quest 1 did, right?
Oh yes, 100%, yeah.
And you can feel the 30 years of polish at work in this game. And that's a new sensation for me. There's not a lot of video games or genres or series or whatever where you can say, yeah, I feel 30 years of active polish going into this thing. You can in Dragon Quest XI. So I recommend this game so highly. And yeah, I can't wait to play some other Dragon Quest games now.
Yeah, the combat system in Dragon Quest XI is fucking great. And I feel very vindicated in my long-held opinion that Final Fantasy went wrong when it introduced the active time battle bullshit. Yes. In like Final Fantasy IV, whichever one was the first one they did. Yeah, and this was just like I was just like, see, that's where they fucked up, and they never. I mean, I guess Final Fantasy X has a pretty good battle system, but it's like they kind of never found it again because they fucked up there. And Dragon Quest is like, no, like this core idea of the turn-based combat with like the status spells and that kind of stuff. That is so solid, you don't need to put any of that extra shit on top of it. Like, this is the most, like, bare-bones, basic fucking JRPG turn-based combat you can have in sort of its structure. It doesn't have any bells and whistles. It doesn't have a gimmick to it or anything like that. It just is what it is, but it is what it is with, like, a incredible degree of like professional and technical and like artistic efficiency in its design and like the kind of clockwork ways in which, as you said, the different team members can sort of synergize together. Again, not in like a like big, there's like a whole like ridiculous system associated with it. There's like that one little like the combination attack or whatever the fuck it's going to be called in English. Like that's, you know, that
Pep
is like
powers.
What the fuck is a pep? What are you even talking about?
In Japanese, it's in the zone, right?
Yes, you enter the zone, which is
I
fucking
love.
rad.
And I wish they would have kept that. It's you get pepped up, P-E-P-P-E-D. You get pepped up, and then you use your pep powers, and it's all based around the letter P. And it's kind of cute, but it is not as cool as you know the Luminary or whatever, the Yusha entered the zone.
Yeah, like I think that'll be a discussion for a full Dragon Quest XI is like the ways that from the outside in the English localization definitely seems like it just cutesied things up like a little bit too much for me for like my tastes.
It's
like,
I would argue it's only proper nouns from what I've seen because it is an extremely well written localization, and I do know that most of the name changes were in some way an internal decision with the team and everything, because they've said that in interviews. So I don't know what came of it. But yeah, it feels like more of a name thing than anything else. But it is odd to me.
Yeah, but anyways, yeah, the way that your team members can work together and the sense of, like, I'll be excited to talk to you just about, like, what kinds of, like, what weapons did you use with your team members and what kind of techniques did you use? Because it feels to me like, you know, this is definitely a game where you kind of pick directions for your characters. And I'm sure that, like, if you like want to grind and get to like max level 99, you can do whatever the fuck you want.
Which I did.
Yes, I'm so close to just being, because I can so see, I already know, even without looking up a guide, how I would fucking get there using metal slimes and stuff. I'm so close to just saying, fuck it, I'm just going to do it, but I don't want to like totally break the end game for me yet. But yeah, but you know, you can really spec out your individual characters and sort of like use them in different ways, and they all combine with each other's abilities in different ways depending on what weapons you give them and how you level them up. And that's something that feels really, really cool and is not something that was present in Dragon Quest 1, 2, or 3. I'm sure Dragon Quest games between 3 and 11 probably started doing some of that stuff, but it is like the main thing in Dragon Quest 11 as someone who only played those really old games. That feels like, oh, they like really nailed that part of the system, because that's so what makes it feel so fresh and like so rewarding to me, is feeling like every time I level up or every time I swap out characters and use someone else, I feel really rewarded and feel like I'm playing the game based on the decisions I've made for these characters, and they're not going to be the same decisions that you made.
And I think it's amazing it does all of that without a class system.
Yes.
You know, because class systems, one of the many things Dragon Quest helped pioneer, I think that might have been in Final Fantasy first, but in any case, Dragon Quest used it a lot over the course of its history, and this one does not do that. It's the characters are who they are. They have the abilities they have. You can choose from a couple of different, like, ability routes, but, you know, it's not like you can take, you know, Veronica, to take the one character who has the same name, and make her whatever you want. She's going to be a magician in some form or another. Yet within that, there is such depth. The phrase that keeps coming back to mind for me with Dragon Quest is still waters run very, very deep, because these waters look nice and still on the surface, and then they get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and soon you have just fucking drowned in them and you don't know. And that's Dragon Quest XI for me. And we should probably move on, but I love this game like it's a person.
Okay, that got like weirdly creepy, but okay.
No, I mean like I know it. Like I just like the amount of it, kind of like with Persona. Like I feel like I spent a lifetime with it in a weird way, you know?
Okay.
And it was weird to put it on the shelf and think like I'm not going to play Dragon Quest tomorrow.
Like you should have phrased it that way, because when you say I loved it like a person, I see you like when you pulled the disc out of the PS4, like kissing it on the little like hole in the middle, because that's how
you can love in a non-sexual way.
Yeah,
pervert.
But when you say it, like, if When you say it like I love you, like I love a person, that just like sounds like you're gonna rip their fucking skin off and do bad things with it. Like it's just a weird serial killer, like sexual predator kind of thing to say. I don't know.
Okay, well, thank you, Sean. You've made me feel very good about myself. Let's go ahead and move on. Here's my piece of stuff for this week is First Man. The movie came out this weekend, and no one went to see it, which makes me very sad, because this is a really good movie, and you should all go to see it. But this is the new film by Damien Chazelle, who made Whiplash and La La Land, and this is the film about Neil Armstrong, the first man who walked on the moon, so hence the title First Man.
That's who Neil Armstrong is. Oh, man, I just kept on hearing that name. Didn't know why people were talking about him so much.
Yes. But it's about Neil Armstrong. He's played by Ryan Gosling, and the film traces basically his life in the 1960s from being a test pilot to joining NASA and eventually walking on the surface of the moon. And it is such an insanely good movie. It is I expected it to be good. It's got a good pedigree. I think Damien Chazelle is an amazing filmmaker. He's only 33, which makes me just feel like insecure about all my life choices because he's done a lot of good stuff by the age of 33. And yeah, I got some years left until then, but who knows? But anyway, so I expected it to be good, but I think the particular kind of good it is sort of blew me away. On the one hand, it's a really experiential, immediate illustration of the space program that puts you right there in the capsule with the astronauts, with Neil Armstrong, on these missions, up to and including landing on the fucking moon, and you just feel like you're there. There are parts of this movie that feel like when you go to Disneyland and they put you in one of those, like, you know, theater rooms where the theater, like, moves and shakes, and it's all in 3D and all that stuff. This movie isn't in 3D and the theater isn't shaking, but just, like, the camera work is so good. It is such an immediate sense of being there. The sound design is so ridiculously immersive that you just feel the sensation of being in these crazy scenarios of going out into fucking space. No movie has ever made me realize, like, I think this deeply of, like, right, every one of these people was fucking insane on some level to, like, get in a little metal tube and go into fucking space. Like, you will feel how crazy a thing that is to do. And I think it's a really just cool use of the cinematic medium in that way. But it's also a really good, pointed character study about this guy who, you know, in a very, like, typical 1960s, you know, dad kind of way, was emotionally shut off, was not able to, like, talk about or understand sort of his own feelings, had a very single-minded focus on his job and his career and what he was doing. One of the arcs the film traces is that, and this is where the film starts, is that in I think it was 61, the Armstrongs had a daughter and she died of cancer before she was 3, so he loses this child, and they use that as kind of the emotional through line of the film, of this guy who, again, really does not know how to, like, talk about, deal with his own feelings, and they kind of show him pouring that into his work on the lunar missions, and I think it's a smart choice. It is backed up in some ways by, you know, biographical accounts and all that. Ryan Gosling is tremendous. I think Ryan Gosling's a great actor. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything where he was not just 100% there doing great, interesting, soulful, thoughtful work. But I think this might be a new high for him. He's got very little dialogue in the film, actually, because this is a pretty, again, stoic, quiet character, but he just acts the hell out of this thing. He is so good working with sort of so little, and it's a really amazing character portrait. And what I really felt in the final sequences when they arrive on the moon and he takes that first step out there is you feel both the weight of the human achievement of, like, oh my God, we did this. We put a person on the moon. And you think about what an insane, wonderful, ambitious thing that was for us to do as a species, as a country, as a people. You feel the weight of that. But you also feel the weight of a person went to the moon. You know, like, this guy lived his life trying to get there, working on this as an engineer and as an astronaut, and as a human being who had relationships and who had losses and who had, you know, love in his life and these different things, and took that with him into space. And again, I don't think I've seen a movie about historical space travel, at least, that made me feel that powerfully of, like, this is a real person doing these things. And I think that's a really cool achievement for this film. And I would very highly recommend it. It's outstanding. The cinematography is amazing. It starts on 16 millimeter. As the decade goes on, it gets into 35 millimeter. And then all the stuff on the moon is shot in IMAX 70. So it uses film stock in interesting ways. The music by Justin Hurwitz, who is Damien Chazelle's normal composer, is fantastic. We've talked before about how movie scores today generally suck. This is a movie score I walked out of the theater like humming to myself, which is, I don't know the last time I did that. It's a really special just piece of film music, and just everything about it. It's an outstanding film. I can't recommend it highly enough. And if you have any interest in space and what a cool thing that was that we did and then for some reason stopped doing because we just can't dream that big anymore, I think this is a really interesting testament to that time.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds really fucking cool.
Yeah, and you should see it in a theater. Like, it's a theatrical experience. It will not be the same on DVD. It will not be the same on your TV. It needs to be seen in a big experiential format. If you have an IMAX near you, it's got to be pretty cool, because I know the screen expands for the moon sequences. We do not have an IMAX in Iowa City. The closest one is 50 miles away, so I don't think I'm going to the IMAX anytime soon.
Yeah.
But if you have one, that would be a cool way to see it.
Cool.
And I know you have one about 2 minutes away. So.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah. All right. Have you seen any movies?
No, it's been a while since I watched a movie. I'm legitimately trying to remember. I think the last time I watched a movie is I watched the Orson Welles movie, The Stranger, that's on Netflix. Because that's a
cool.
good movie.
Nice.
So people should watch. I watched that like 2 months ago, but you should watch that. It's a good movie.
I watched the Orson Welles movie Citizen Kane in film class. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one. It's a little
movie.
obscure. Yeah,
I like that movie.
Yeah. No, I've also been watching Dragon Ball Super, Sean.
I like that also.
I'm going to talk about it for a minute. At one point, we were hoping to maybe do some podcasts, like going over the different arcs of Super, and maybe we can at some point, but we've got a pretty packed schedule between now and when the movie comes out, so yeah. I'm just going to do a little bit on it right now, because I'm right about to start the Future Trunks arc. So I'm through all of the Universe 6 versus Universe 7 stuff, which is the third arc of the series, but the first original one, because the first two arcs are very bad retellings of two very good Dragon Ball movies. And then the series turns on a fucking dime and gets great. It just gets great. The Champa arc, the God of Destruction Champa, where Universe 6 and Universe 7 have a fun tournament, is so good. And part of this is that I'm a Dragon Ball fan who loves the tournament stuff. The Tenkaichi Budokai arcs in original Dragon Ball are just three of my favorite arcs Akira Toriyama ever wrote. When they would do little homage arcs in the anime for filler, or the one time in the manga when he went back to it for a little bit, it tickles me. I love that stuff. It's so fun. And this is a really well done version of it with just crazy, fun, cool characters. I think it has interesting twists on sort of the different species of the Dragon Ball universe. It's extraordinarily funny. One of my favorite things about Super at this point is that Masuko Nozawa, who plays Goku, just gets to give her comic chops a workout in every episode, and she is so funny. And I think we've always known that, especially in original Dragon Ball when Goku's a little kid, she's very, very funny. But Dragon Ball Z tends to get fairly serious with a lot of the big arcs, and she makes me laugh a couple times an episode. That all makes me happy. I think this show uses Vegeta better than he has been used in Dragon Ball lore at any point since, I don't know, some of the Cell arc stuff. It's been a while since we've had anything that good with him. My favorite episode of Super so far is the one where Vegeta fights Kaba, the other Saiyan from Universe 7, and basically winds up giving Kaba a training session through the fight they have. And it builds to, I think, the coolest line Vegeta has ever had when he defeats Kaba and tells him, do not forget this pain. Carry it with you. And I'm just God, that was good. That's an amazing episode of that series. I just love all of it. I love the way it ends. I love that when they summon the Super Shenlong with the Super Dragon Balls, they just decide to go fucking trippy for half an episode, and Dragon Ball just becomes an LSD fever dream for 10, 15 minutes. That's all really great. I love how they've used all the new characters like Monica. There's the episode after the arc where Goku wants to fight Monica, and I'm not even going to spoil what happens, but hilarity ensues. I don't think I've ever laughed that hard at something Dragon Ball related, and Dragon Ball is a frequently funny series. That made me laugh like a maniac. It's all so good. I'm very happy to be finally like in the flow of this series that I sort of missed while it was airing, just because of other things, and it's hard to watch anime week to week. But it's so good, Sean.
Yeah, I'm glad you're finally because you were stuck at those fucking movie arcs for so long.
I just couldn't get past it. I should have just skipped them. I should just say, if you want to watch Dragon Ball Super and have not, watch the movies Battle of Gods and Resurrection F, and then start at episode 28 of Super. Just start there. The first 27 episodes, there's a couple of fun filler episodes, but you can go back to them later. Watch the movies, they're the good versions of this. And then the show is good after that. You can just skip them.
Yeah, because I'm just so glad that you're into it and really enjoying it. And yeah, the Vegeta episode where he fights Cabba is one that I think that's when I went from being I really am enjoying Dragon Ball Super to this is doing something really powerful and interesting with the material.
I agree.
Yeah, it's just as you said, Vegeta as a character there are periods in Dragon Ball Z where he's used very well, and periods in Dragon Ball Z where he's just there because, he's cool, and we're kind of waiting for another arc where we can, in another story beat where we can use him again, and then he kind of goes on the shelf for a while. I think Dragon Ball Super just is much more consistent about it being, for most of the series, really kind of a two-hander between Goku and Vegeta, who are kind of co-leads, as opposed to the kind of ensemble that their Dragon Ball Z is. And that just moment where you get to see Vegeta, just how much he's grown as a character, and him being able to be the king of Saiyans, basically, of this universe, and kind of be this thing that he had always been going around yelling about, I'm the Prince of Saiyans, I'm royal blood, all that kind of stuff, and you never really lived up to any of that. And now he's finally grown to this place in that episode where you see him be able to sort of take Cabba under his wing and show him this is what it means to be a Saiyan from my perspective, and get that kind of this other side of Vegeta we never really had an opportunity to see before. And that's that kind of character stuff continues through from the rest of Dragon Ball Super, and yeah, it's really awesome. Well done.
Because you had said that to me before, that Goku and Vegeta sort of become co-leads on Super, and I just wasn't seeing it until I got to the new stuff, because in the movies, the two recent movies, those are Goku stories. Vegeta is in them. He's well used, but there's no doubt who the protagonist is. It's Goku. And the TV adaptations do not change that substantially in any way, shape, or form. Goku is the focus. And when you get past that, though, into the tournament arc, and then some of the filler past that I'm already... I call it filler because I don't know what else to call it. It's not filler. There's no manga that they're filling out the... I mean, there is a Dragon Ball Super manga, but it's based on the anime, so you know what I mean. But yeah, the stuff in between bigger arcs, which is not technically filler, they continue to do that with Vegeta. And I agree, the way they move Vegeta up to second lead or just straight up co-lead status is really interesting. I agree that it works really interestingly as a two-hander. That, to me, feels like the justification for doing more of a TV series instead of one-off movies. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because now you're taking it in a new direction. Also, some of the fight choreography is just so good. The fight between Goku and Hito, who I love. Yeah. Just Hit. Hit is a good name, but the way you have to say it in Japanese is so much better.
Yes.
And Hit is such a cool character. And the fight he and Goku have, I'll just spoil it, the part where Goku goes 10 times Kaioken on top of Super Saiyan Blue. I was audibly in my living room going, fuck, because as a longtime Dragon Ball fan for whom, Kaioken means something to me,
yeah,
and, we haven't seen it in that story since the Saiyan arc. It was never really used again. Maybe in some of the movies a little bit. I'm yes, I've always kind of wondered that in the back of my head, what would it be like if he just started doing the Kaioken thing on top of Super Saiyan, and they did it, and it was cool, and he was blue, and there was also a red aura, and it just, every part of my brain, it was just oh my god, this is so cool. And, yeah, I love that, we can talk about Dragon Ball analytically and what it does with the characters, but also, fuck, that was cool.
Yeah, now you have to go back and play Dragon Ball FighterZ again, because that's the level 3 super that Super Saiyan Blue Goku has in that game.
Nice.
And it is the best level 3 super in that game. It is just unfucking believable. Like, how far they take that whole sequence in the game is awesome.
I'm excited for that. I actually, when I took Dragon Quest XI out of my PS4 this afternoon, I put Dragon Ball FighterZ in so I would remember to play it next time I boot up my PS4, because I want to get back into that game and make sure I've played it a fair amount before like the end of the year and everything, because I really liked it when it came out, but I have not taken the time to play it as extensively as you have, for instance, and I want to go back to it now that I'm in the thick of Super and I know who some of these characters are. I also want to take note, I'm not listening to the dub generally. Once in a while I'll switch over if there was a scene I'm like, I really wonder how they handled that in the dub, because I'm watching the Blu-rays and I can just go back and forth. And there are some fun things here and there. I'm sure if you're a dub fan, you're well serviced by this. It's not generally my cup of tea. In the filler episodes where they go to planet Potafu before the Future Trunks arc, which is a really funny, it's 3 episodes, and it feels like it was made on a dare where someone said, what if we did an arc from Dragon Ball GT and did it good? Because that's exactly what those 3 episodes feel like. Down to the character designs are just Dragon Ball GT character designs, right?
Oh, I had not thought of it that way. You are 100% right. It totally does feel like they like took a script that was for that like first arc of Dragon Ball GT where they're like flying around the universe and like use that to build up their own episode out of it.
It absolutely feels like that. So they're very fun. But part of that story is that Vegeta gets cloned by this like weird purple energy, the whole story behind it. And so there's a regular Vegeta and a clone Vegeta. And the clone Vegeta it's not Ryo Horikawa. It's a different actor doing like an impression of Ryo Horikawa in Japanese. So in English, what they did, I noticed this running through the end credits, and then I was like, wait, did they? And I rewound it to see it. They got Brian Drummond back to voice Vegeta in English, and he's the original voice of Vegeta. Before Chris Sabat did it, it was Brian Drummond. He did the first 2 or 3 seasons of the anime when they had a different cast than they have now. He's the guy who did the "It's over 9,000" line that is so famous, and that just... I had a big smile on my face watching some of those scenes through again in English, because that was a very creative thing to do. So you have modern Vegeta, Chris Sabat, against Brian Drummond's original Vegeta, and they're having a lot of fun with that, and I think that's a cool opportunity that the English team took there.
Yeah, I just really like the spot that like English Dragon Ball is in, even if, I've basically totally migrated over to the Japanese side of things at this point. It is nice to see them like feeling like they have like the freedom and like the experience with the series to just like really sort of take to it, and like they did that with Dragon Ball Kai, and like the recast they did with like Frieza and stuff were so well done, and being able to redo those roles from that they did a really great job at. And then with like the new movies and Dragon Ball Super, and just seeing them be able to like have the fucking like New York Comic Con panel and that kind of stuff, it feels cool that Chris Sabat and Sean Schemmel and all those people that have been working on Dragon Ball for decades on the American side of things get to have this opportunity too, and people love them, and they get to kind of revisit these characters and do them justice and all that kind of stuff.
Like, if for no other reason, I'm glad Dragon Ball Kai happened so the English dub could get its shit together, because that was the chance they had to like reset, do it right. They did it right. And then when all this new stuff started coming out with the movies and Dragon Ball Super, they were in such a better position, because I really, I dread the thought of what they would have done with Super if they had not had the chance to, rectify it with Kai, and get that new experience. But they did, and they brought it forward, and it is cool because, I don't watch the dub, as a choice on my own much. I respect it, but it's just, I've always watched it in Japanese. I've never been a big dub person with Dragon Ball, even as a kid. But... when I go see it in theaters, the new movie is not going to be in Japanese in theaters. It's going to be in English, and that's how Battle of Gods and Resurrection F were as well. And I like that when I go to see Dragon Ball in a theater, I don't have to worry about it and just be like, these aren't the voices I usually listen to, but they're going to do a great job. And that is a much better position to be in than when we were kids in 2002. So, yeah, that's very neat. And I look forward to, as these Blu-rays keep coming out, seeing if they've done any other fun little things like that with the dub, because it is cool to switch between them and hear some of that. So, all right, that's my little section on Dragon Ball Super. You want to go ahead and look at the news, Sean?
What's going on in the news, Jonathan?
All right, 2 pieces of news out of Microsoft. First, Microsoft announced Project X Cloud. They're
such a bad name. It's such a bad fucking name.
From the people who brought you Xbox One and Xbox One X comes Project X Cloud. This is their initiative to stream Xbox games to computers, tablets, phones, etc. This will be going into a public beta in 2019. It will include universal touchscreen controls for mobile devices, so you don't have to have a controller, although you can use one. So this is sort of like they're basically trying to do, like the PlayStation 4 to PlayStation Vita thing, but with everything. So you can just play your games. You don't even have to have an Xbox, I guess. They haven't really announced, is it going to be a subscription service? Is it going to be an a la carte thing? We're not sure. They're going to be doing a beta of it, and the goal is, as they've been doing a lot this generation, expanding the Xbox brand beyond the hardware to make it more of a software delivery sort of thing. So Microsoft joins Google in dipping their toes more and more into the streaming waters. What do you think of this kind of weird announcement, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like it's because they put out like a 3-minute video or whatever of like kind of like a bunch of software engineers talking about it and like long shots of like server racks and stuff and maps with like data center locations and all that. And so, yeah, there's not a lot of details. It feels like them sort of like it's the next step after what they did at E3, which was just saying like, hey, this is something we're looking at, and this is like, hey, this is something we're starting to move forward on, but it is like we're going to do some sort of like test next year with like select members, and yeah, so it feels like it is still far off from like what they're trying to do, and we don't know anything about the like how like the business side of things, and as you said, how you're going to pay for games. Is it just going to roll into like your game plan subscription, whatever it's called, all that kind of stuff. It just feels like it is. I feel like we have talked about this on like the last like 7 podcasts as news trickles out from different companies about the game streaming stuff. It is, it feels like it is where a lot of things are going, but like in that way that is going to be convenient for people that live in like major metropolitan centers where, they have access to good internet and have access to internet in a variety of different places. Whereas like for me, I look at what they were talking about with that and it was like, this is not going to be useful for me in any way, but it is, it makes sense for them to start developing the technology.
Yeah, I guess my feeling on it is that I think all these companies are in an arms war with streaming where they are like stockpiling in their technology bunkers in the event that streaming might one day be viable to a large swath of the public for video games. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I don't think there's any clear indications that internet infrastructure is going to be good enough for that to be a near-term, large-scale project. But I feel like everyone sees everyone else preparing for it, and I think everyone wants to be in a position where if it is a viable long-term project, they want to be able to just start it. You know what I mean? They just want to be able to go and not have to develop the technology. So, I guess it makes sense in that way. Microsoft is definitely battening down the hatches for the next generation. They are trying to get as much technology and service infrastructure on their side for the next generation of consoles as they possibly can, because they want to come out strong with new hardware, obviously, but also new software, which relates to all their acquisitions of studios. We have one of those to talk about today as well, with some of their different behind-the-scenes things, like tech stuff, backwards compatibility, all the stuff they've done with the Xbox One platform, the Xbox One games that you can play on PC, and all the cross-play features, and now the streaming stuff. It feels like they're really guarding, for Xbox, hopefully continuing to be a brand, even if they can't make the console thing work. I don't know if that's going to happen. We'll see. But yeah, they are throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and hoping some of it will stick. One of those things is there were reports this week that Microsoft is going to be purchasing developers Obsidian Entertainment. They've developed many things. Most recently, they're known for the Pillars of Eternity series, but they've also made games such as Fallout New Vegas and the South Park Stick of Truth game and things like that. So generally a well-respected developer, sort of a mid-level indie studio that had a lot of resources, but have always kind of been on the verge of not making it. So it makes sense that they would want to hitch their wagon to one of the big names in town, and I think it makes a lot of sense that Microsoft would want a studio of this scale on their side. My point of view on this is that I hope Microsoft lets them do the things they want to do and doesn't immediately put them on a Fable sequel or something and give them the Rare treatment. Because I think a properly funded, properly supported Obsidian Entertainment that could be their Naughty Dog. Like, that could be their, like, big development powerhouse studio if they invest in it right. The talent is clearly there. Microsoft does not necessarily have a history of always investing right in their acquired properties, but hopefully they're learning their lesson.
Yeah, Obsidian is a really interesting studio for Microsoft to go after, because it is that, like, situation where, like, Obsidian is really respected in certain ways and is definitely beloved by a lot of sort of like Western and computer RPG faithfuls. But they're like their projects, because I've played a number of different Obsidian games, like most notably KOTOR 2. Obviously, that's like way back in the day, but that and Fallout New Vegas and a couple of others. Like they also did Alpha Protocol, and all of those games are games that have like some really good writing and some really interesting ideas, and like are doing interesting things. But either, and probably like a combination of a bunch of different things, including to like mismanagement within the studio, mismanagement within the publisher, like lack of funds, lack of time, and like not like having release dates moved up, which I'm pretty sure is what happened to KOTOR 2 specifically, is that they thought they were going to be able to release later, and then the publisher was like, no, actually, we have to release earlier than, I think because that was like Revenge of the Sith was coming out or something. They're like, we want to time it more with the movie. And so, they've always kind of gotten jerked around and that kind of stuff, and so it's never felt like I've ever had a good feel for like what is Obsidian, a studio that like has this amazing game to be made and just like keeps on getting like rotten luck, or are they a studio that's like really poorly managed in a lot of ways, and thus they have all these interesting ideas but they can never quite execute on them. And that's kind of how I have always personally felt about Obsidian, and so I'm curious to see if this, like, how this Microsoft purchase will change that equation, or if it will change that equation, and if, like, they will be more hands-on in, like, a publishing fashion, and, like, in a way that would be helpful for Obsidian, or in a way that might be destructive for Obsidian and interfere in what they're trying to do. It is definitely, they are a studio with a much sort of deeper pedigree than the other studios they've purchased, like Playground, and even Ninja Theory, which is a good developer, but Ninja Theory has only made, like, 3 or 4 games. Whereas Obsidian has been around for a while and has made a lot of different stuff, worked on a lot of different projects. And so, yeah, I'm very curious to see how this will turn out. But it is that kind of thing where my personal experience with Obsidian games has been so up and down that I don't really know. To me, it is something where it's like there's a lot of potential there, but it's not like an automatic home run.
Yeah. This is the question with every studio they've been buying. It feels like an open secret that Playground Games is doing a Fable game. Is that right from what we've heard?
Yes, that's been the rumor for a couple of years. And they basically kind of said that without saying that at last E3.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think they're buying Obsidian to do, like, new IP stuff? To do existing Obsidian IP stuff? Is Pillars of Eternity that big? Or are they buying them to do, I don't know, Conker's Bad for a Day 3? Like...
Well, they would be very stupid to buy them and have them make anything that wasn't an RPG, because it's literally, I think that's the only kind of game Obsidian has ever made.
Yeah.
But yeah, I if Microsoft was smart, I think they would use them to develop a new IP, because Microsoft just
has none.
Yeah, they have none. Like they have almost no games, but like on top of that, all the games they have are like, Forza Motorsport, or Forza Horizon 4 came out, or Forza Horizons 5, if you go back to that Walmart leak. But that came out this year, and that's their main exclusive. It's like, that's cool. But that's Forza Horizon 4, which is a spin-off of the Forza series that just had Forza Motorsport 7 come out last year. So it's like... Like, they're good games, obviously, but when you have, like, the 4th game, which is the spin-off of the game that just had its 7th game, and then now we're on Halo 6, we're on Gears of War 5, which is actually Gears of War 6 if you count Gears of War Judgment, and actually I guess Halo is Halo 7.
Halo is Halo 7, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, their franchises are long in the tooth. They've had them all for, like, a generation or generation plus, like with Halo. And then, if they're doing Fable, that's from the late original Xbox generation. So all that stuff is so old. They really need an injection of something new, which is like what Sony has managed to do with Horizon Zero Dawn, or I would even kind of throw Spider-Man in there, even though Spider-Man is not a new IP. That game feels fresh and new because we haven't had a good Spider-Man game in years, and this studio has never made a Spider-Man game like that. And so Sony has been much better about like keeping their old stuff like Uncharted or Last of Us, and refreshing it like with God of War, and then also putting new stuff forward like Horizon, Spider-Man, and Ghost of Tsushima for the future.
But Sony's also known, like, I think the reverse of that is Sony has also known when to cut bait and run. Like, you know what, Killzone, we don't need you anymore. Fly free, Guerrilla Games. Go make something new. Killzone can be a thing of the past, right? Or Infamous, like Infamous Second Son, you were really good, but this is not a forever franchise. Infamous can be laid to rest. And fly free, Ghost of Tsushima. It looks great, right? So, like, they've known when to cut something, free, whereas Microsoft is still intent on getting Crackdown 3 out into the world. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, they're running against the wall, like, with their heads and just banging their heads against the wall, hoping it'll work. And it hasn't. We all played Gears of War 4 and Halo 5. And actually, I say we all played. Not many people played them. That's the problem. They weren't that good.
Yeah, and it's that kind of thing where I don't know, it's like whether or not I think they will do a new IP and whether or not I should do a new IP are totally different questions, because I have no idea, because this is part of, like, Microsoft's initiative of buying new studios, and we haven't seen, because this is so new, we haven't seen anything come of it yet.
This is for the next generation, not for this one.
But they would be phenomenally stupid not to use this opportunity to make new IPs. Because what Sony has done, as you pointed out, like, what Sony did was make, like, a hard, like, management decision, which was to say, we have these bankable IPs that we know there are a certain number of people that are definitely going to buy another Killzone game. There's a certain number of people that are definitely going to buy an Infamous game. Those people, like, I would definitely buy another Infamous game. I probably would not buy another Killzone game. I played Killzone 2, 3, and Shadowfall, and kind of liked 2, and kind of liked Shadowfall, and tolerated 3. It's like, they're decent games. But there are other people that are not us that are like, I really love Killzone. Like, that, those games hit what I wanted from first-person, like, single-player campaigns, and they would definitely buy another one. So Sony had made the hard management choice of saying, we're going to take the risk of losing all those people by not having Guerrilla Games make another Killzone thing, but, take the risk of saying, but if we make Horizon Zero Dawn, let these really, really talented developers make the game that they want to make, new people will flock to it because they have the confidence in the developers and the confidence on the idea that it's going to be good enough that they're going to, not only they're going to bring back the people that loved the old other IPs, but they're going to get new people coming in that are look at Horizon Zero Dawn and say, that looks awesome. I love robot fucking dinosaurs. That's the raddest shit in the world. I want to play that game. And so, that's like Sony did the right choice there. What Microsoft has is a much easier choice because Obsidian doesn't have IPs. Like, the Obsidian IP would be like Alpha Protocol, but I don't think they own any of that shit. Or I guess Pillars of Eternity.
Pillars of Eternity. But, and Pillars of Eternity, by all accounts, is very, very good. But I don't think you buy them just for that.
No, because that's like those, people like those games, but they are niche kind of like CRPGs that, are throwbacks to, like, Baldur's Gate and those games from the early 2000s, late 90s. And I don't think that would not make sense to be like, okay, we're going to get all the Pillars of Eternity people onto the Xbox platform, these, like, hardcore computer RPGs in the vein of Baldur's Gate. Like, that's a really dumb move. So it's like they have this opportunity with studios like Obsidian and Ninja Theory to say, there's no, like, real risk of like losing people if we don't have you working on old IPs. You have this, like, fresh territory to, like, be like, you can just make what you need to make and what you want to make, and, like, use that to build your next stable of IPs to, like, power their, like, what it would be their fourth console generation, because the Xbox One has had nothing. The Xbox One had Sunset Overdrive, which never took off, and then Insomniac jumped ship to make a Sony first-party game. And then they had Recore, which seems like Microsoft mismanaged that project and came out like completely half-baked. And so if Recore could have been a great IP, they fucked that up. They had Scalebound, and they canceled that project. So it's like they had that phase where they were trying it out, and they basically had three swings and struck out at base. And so they have fucking nothing for the rest of this whole generation. So it is something where it's like for Xbox 2, they need to be on the ground floor with, like, this cool new RPG from Obsidian that takes advantage of all the stuff that the next Xbox platform will do, and make someone like me look at it and be like, oh, cool. Like, all the stuff that I loved about KOTOR 2 and Fallout New Vegas is there in this new Obsidian game, and all this shit about, like, the glitches and long loading times and, like, maybe it being, like, too edgy for its own sake and kind of getting it up its own ass a little bit, that stuff was left at the door. Like, if they do that, that is a good move for me to be like, okay, maybe I would consider getting an Xbox platform the next time around.
Yeah. I think the the real test for me in seeing if Microsoft is serious about making this video game thing work is if at some point in the near future they let the Coalition or 343 Industries make something that is not Gears of War or Halo.
That is never going to happen. We will die.
But that's the hard choice. Like you know, Naughty Dog had a good thing going with Uncharted, and Sony had to say, you know, try your zombie thing out. And The Last of Us sold 20 million copies. So
here's the main difference. Naughty Dog was not a studio made by Sony called Uncharted Studio,
I know,
right?
I know. But like
I agree with you that would be the right choice. But I feel like I wouldn't even entertain the possibility because I just don't even see it.
But that's my point. Like it's kind of a moot. I mean, maybe if everything else works out well enough, then they can keep their Halo and Gears of War thing going. But that's not how you win the future. It is Halo and Gears of War. You know,
that's
they're
very
dead
clear.
series. All right, so let's go ahead and move on over to PlayStation. The PSN is going to allow name changes on its platform. This is a feature that has been asked about for over a decade.
Yes, yeah.
It is coming in 2019. The first change will be free. Subsequent changes will cost $10, $5 if you have PlayStation Plus. Not all past PS3, Vita, and PS4 games will support name changes, which was an odd little detail in there. But yes, a feature that Xbox Live has had since the launch of Xbox Live, I think.
Certainly when the 360 was there, but I suspect it was the launch of Xbox Live on the original Xbox.
I remember drama around friends changing their Xbox Live names in high school.
Yes.
So this is the most hilariously behind the times thing Sony was doing, was not allowing PSN name changes. I never really cared because I didn't pick a stupid fucking name. I think my name on PSN is just Jonathan Lack at this point. But it clearly people wanted this. It was very strange that Sony was just not doing it for well over a decade. And it's here. And if you were one of those people who just desperately needed to change your PSN name, I guess I'm happy for you.
Well, I think what happened, this would be a thing I would love for Jason Schreier's next book to instead of you have a bunch of game development stories, and I would love this story. Because what it is, obviously Sony has never, come out and officially said anything about, why the name change thing took so long. But enough is known, and it's very clear, based on the fact that not all past games will support name changes. And specifically, they have to go in to older games and change things in those older games to make it be able to recognize the name change, is what tells you that, when they made PSN, they made some really dumb fucking choice around what usernames are, which is, and I'm obviously not an expert on this stuff, but basically how I understand it is typically when you're designing a username interface, and especially any modern internet thing, they get a little bit of slack for having probably designed this in 2005 since the PS3 came out in 2006. So it's console internet stuff was still finicky back then, so I guess they fucked this up. But you're supposed to, with your new username, have it be associated with some sort of unique identity key that is invisible to the user. That's, just a string of bullshit. That's a string of numbers and letters. That is what the system recognizes as that is what your account is. And then on top of that is the account name information and the account password information, which can be changed and altered without ever altering that unique identifier key that is in the system. So that way you can still associate this is what this account is, and it is, you can change the name, you can change the password, but we will always know originally what that account is because that's only visible on the host side, not on the client side. And so what it seems like Sony must have done when they designed PSN is that when you made your username, your unique identifying tag on their servers and their system was your username, which meant that you could not change it without fucking everything up, because then they would have no idea what your purchases were, because all of your purchases have some string of numbers that identify that you purchased this thing. They would have to be able to change all that information dynamically, which I imagine was the incredible system challenge that they have probably been trying to figure out for years, until I'm guessing what they have now said is something they should have done when they made the PS4, because it would have been a much easier break. Would be whatever, if Jonathan, yours was just your name, Jonathan Lack, but you wanted to change it to Hot Shot Sniper XX420 for whatever reason, and you regressed in your life at that point. It seems like your unique identifier on their server side is always going to be Jonathan Lack, And then now they have added this other field, which is what you see and what other people on the service see, which is Hotshot 420XX Sniper, whatever, and that's what has had to happen. And they just, twiddled their thumbs for so long on this that it has become more of a problem than it would have been if they had just done this at the console break.
That's so weird. Because I was going to ask you if you knew why. Because I did not. I had not heard that whole explanation. So this whole thing has always just baffled me. I just assumed it was in that pool of things of like, I don't know, Sony's bucket of spite of like, we're not doing this because we say we're not going to do it. That makes more sense. It's maybe not a bucket of spite thing. But yeah, that's crazy. I definitely would, if you need to change your name, wait and see a couple other people do it first and make sure it works, because that sounds like a whole can of technical worms here. They are doing a beta period with this, I guess, to make sure it's okay. But, that's crazy. I feel like maybe I should just change my name to Hotshot Sniper 4XX just for the hell of it, They worked so hard to make it work, I gotta reward them for it.
Yes, and what better user tag than that,
Absolutely. All right, so that's piece of news. Then finally this week, microtransactions are back in the news. They never really leave the news. They're kind of an omnipresent part of the video game industry at this point. This is a discussion we should probably have as a full topic sometime, Sean, but I think as a mini topic, I want to dive into this because the release of Assassin's Creed Odyssey and its 5,456 different versions has prompted a new discussion about the morality, I guess you would say, the okayness of having microtransactions in video games. Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Ubisoft really went to town on the microtransactions. They have things like an XP boost that allows you to play through the game faster because you level faster than in the base version of the game. That's a $10 purchase. There are loot boxes and things. There's all sorts of cosmetic things you can buy. The game is littered with potential microtransactions. And while I was exaggerating a little bit with 5,000 different versions, they did, if you go to the storefront in PSN or Xbox, there are 30 different versions of Assassin's Creed Odyssey you can buy. There's the main normal version, special edition, ultimate edition, ultra ultimate edition, and then there's all these other things. There's all sorts of ways to buy it. This is not just you can buy the $60 game and play it, and that is something critics have been reminding people of a lot, but there is this shroud of microtransactions hanging over the game, and it has prompted a lot of discussion in the video game industry, or at least the not the industry I should say, but within discussion circles, critics and journalists and comment sections and Twitter and Reddit and all those horrible people. Just kidding. I mean, there have been a lot of people being horrible about this, but it's a whole kerfuffle. So I thought maybe we should just take a step back and talk about this for a minute. We are not playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, but I will say I wanted to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey at some point. The main reason I'm not playing it is because of time more than anything else. Time and priorities is the thing that's going to make me not get to it anytime soon. But I will tell you, the sheer level of noise about the microtransactions bullshit pretty well ensures I'm never touching this game. It feels like a toxic thing right now.
Yeah, it's really weird because what happened last year around microtransactions was different because it was specifically about loot boxes, and that was the EA thing with specifically with Battlefront 2 and then also I think Shadow of War was one of the other big ones. And there are a couple of games. I think Forza also fucking did it. That was big on the loot box shit, and that that freaked everybody out because there was such a backlash to it. By everybody, I mean all the games companies got freaked the fuck out because there was such a backlash to it. And an actual more meaningful backlash because games like Battlefront 2 did not sell as well as their predecessors. And just every site was covering it for days and days and days. People were just so up in arms, even for good reason, around a lot of the bullshit that EA specifically did with Battlefront 2. And then down to different European countries. I want to say Belgium, maybe some European countries have started and are considering legislation around dealing with loot boxes because it is effectively this exploitative form of gambling. It's more or less a slot machine you put into a video game that where you come out with fake video game swords instead of real money, which is whether or not that makes it less ethical or more ethical than a slot machine depends on who you are. But yeah, like the loot box thing was a little bit different because Assassin's Creed Odyssey does not have for money loot boxes. It does have loot boxes, but it's like all in-game currency from what I understand. Which is a change because I'm pretty sure Origins you could pay for the like currency you would buy loot boxes for. But in this game, it has now regressed to what felt like how we were talking about microtransactions in like the mid 2000s or like around 2010 when this shit was new. And everyone was doing, like, season passes were the biggest thing, and, like, the shit of, like, oh, you have to buy a physical copy of the game to be able to play multiplayer and get, like, a multiplayer pass that EA did that. Like, it feels like we've regressed to that period around this shit, where now we're talking about, like, XP doublers, and we're talking about, like, buying, like, swords and horses, like, for, like, $3 or something, like what you did on Gears of War 3 with all the skins they had, or, like, Red Dead Redemption had some of this stuff.
The Warhorse.
Yeah, the Warhorse. Like, it feels like this really weird thing where Ubisoft looked at everyone's freaking the fuck out about loot boxes. We mostly dodged that bullet because, like, nobody was that concerned about our loot box bullshit. But instead we're going to apparently like having, as you pointed out, like 5 or 6 different collector's editions, like the top of which is like $200 or something, and like digital deluxe super mega ultra editions on like the gold version or whatever on PSN, basically making it almost impossible to find the fucking game or the version you want if you're searching it on like the PSN store, because there's so many different versions you don't even know which one is which. Instead of just having that, which is already annoying, they have then added these old school microtransactions, and the most like shocking of which is to me that XP doubler. And that's the kind of thing where it feels like a fucking phone game from 2010. Like, phone games don't even do the coin doubler thing anymore. They have moved on to different, predatory business practices. And it's so weird to me to be sitting here in the year of our Lord 2018 and be talking about fucking XP doublers. And I don't even really know what to make of it. But it is so, like you, it kind of it feels odious to me. It's that kind of thing where you know that when you're playing the game, you're always in the back of your mind going to be wondering, like, is my XP progress slowed specifically? Like, was the experience tuned differently at some point, and then they had to change how it was? And even if that isn't the case, and even if like the XP doubler thing was something they threw in like late in the game, and the publisher, like, people decided, like the publishing arm of Ubisoft decided we need to do this, and it didn't actually change the progression, and like how the base progression is basically how it was intended to be. Even if that is the case, when you're playing the game, you will never know that, and you will always be second guessing it. At least I know I have that personality that I will always be thinking about it.
Yes.
It's one of the reasons why I play almost no free-to-play games to speak of, because it always gets to me at some point that I am always very kind of like suspicious and cynical about what the game is doing in terms of those microtransactions. And so like it makes me like sort of like, I feel pushed away from the game from that stuff.
I do too. So here's what I make of this situation, because I've been thinking about it a lot. My ultimate conclusion, and I'll back up from here, is that to me this is proof that the Western video game industry as it currently stands is not a sustainable business model. Like, just
did Telltale not show that to you yet?
No, I mean, this is okay. Let's say this is another piece of proof. Let's say this is Exhibit F. All right, and here's where it starts for me: is I have a pretty simple view on this shit in video games. If you want to do microtransaction-y kind of stuff, loot boxy kind of stuff, separate from like a story DLC. A story DLC is a little different, but what we would understand to be microtransactions, in-game currency, pay for, either in-game items or things that alter the gameplay, like an XP thing, or then all your loot box stuff. You should not charge money for that game. Period. That's for free-to-play games. That is, if you are charging someone for the video game, and there are all these hidden fees in it, then you're lying about the price of the video game. And I've seen so much of like people kind of defending the Ubisoft situation here to be like, yeah, but I've played the game and trust me, you don't need it to get through it. And I'm like, I believe you that you don't need it to get through it, but Ubisoft doesn't think that. Like, they wouldn't add all this shit on there if they didn't want you to pay more than $60 for their game. They're being dishonest about what they want to charge you for their video game. What they're very clearly saying, and this is why the model is unsustainable, is that if we sold Assassin's Creed Odyssey for $60, and we sold what we expect this game to sell, we would not break even. We would not make the profit we want to make on this video game. So we have to add in all this other stuff. And that is just a fundamentally dishonest business practice, all right? So if you save all that stuff for free-to-play games are their own fucking can of worms. But at least we can understand them in the context of they are that can of worms. You kind of know what it is going into it. We could even regulate that under gambling commission kind of stuff, because that's what that sort of game is. It's gambling. This is a different sort of thing, and it is dishonest. There's a lot of discussion. Video games have not raised their prices since the year 2006, basically, with the launch of the Xbox 360 and the PS3. That's the last time we had a raise in the normal price of a console video game. It went from $50 to $60, and it has stayed at $60 for over a decade, which means in real money terms, the price of video games has gone down. At the same time, I think it's pretty clear that given the price of goods and, kind of middling economy for most people, if you started asking for more than $60 for a regular video game, that would be very dangerous, because I think this is seen as already a very, very expensive sort of thing to buy. $60 for a piece of entertainment is a lot of money. So we can't raise the price of video games, but $60 isn't enough to cover the scale of video games we're making, because we decided to model the entire country of Greece in our video game, and then all the surrounding area in Egypt. So no, we need more money. Now we're going to add all this other shit in. And that's where it comes down to me, is it feels like I'm looking at a house of cards that is starting to fall down, which is these games have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and lived outside their means, and now they're at a point where, like, okay, shit, we actually can't make this financially work with the ridiculous scale we're building these games on, so it comes in a lot of forms. We're going to abuse the players by, effectively charging them more for $60 for the game, or enticing them to spend a lot more than $60 on the game if you buy even just a fraction of what they've put out there into the world. And Odyssey is not the first, group to do this, obviously, first game to do this. We're also abusing our employees with horrible crunch and overtime and all these other things that we know is a factor of the video game industry. And so what it all feels like is, okay, we're looking at an industry that is not aware of how its own largesse, its own size, is eating it from the inside. When people, I've seen a lot of the argument of like, yeah, but they've got to pay for the game some way. What would you have them do? And I'd say make a smaller fucking video game. Right? Like Assassin's Creed Odyssey did not have to model all of Greece. It did not have to be 200 hours long. It did not have to be so big that they had to do the $10 fucking XP doubler thing. Like, it's a pretty simple logic to me on this sort of thing. Like, make the game within the means you have to make the game, and let's all just be honest about what it is. So that's kind of what the discussion boils down to for me on all this, and I think there's maybe a truth there that I'm not seeing just said out loud as much as I would like to hear it said out loud in the discussion.
Yeah, like, I don't know if I take as hardline a stance on it as you. Like, I basically agree with the premise, but I think I think there are ways to do some of this stuff and have it not be as gross. And I think that Assassin's Creed Odyssey is one of those compared to the grossest models we've seen, which is like the $60 game with Battlefront 2 that has full-on loot box systems and has like destroyed its own like internal progression mechanics to try to support some ridiculous loot box thing. Like, we have seen it be worse, and so it's like there's something kind of nice about like, well, this isn't as bad as it used to be, but it's still not. It's far from being ideal. And yeah, it is, like, for me, the biggest issue is looking at the scale of games and it being unsupportable is the labor side of it, especially because that's also one of the things I see people who play games come out in droves sometimes when we have the arguments and like discussions online about whether or not game developers should unionize, is that there's this fear of like, oh, we're not going to get Red Dead Redemption 2 or whatever, like the Red Dead Redemption 2 that's coming out, like would be the game it would be, or Assassin's Creed
Rockstar's
Odyssey.
Okay, guys. That's the one I wouldn't worry about. They actually do have the money.
Yeah, no, like, because to support a game like what looks like Red Dead Redemption 2 is, you need to sell the tens of millions of copies, the 30, 40, 50 million copies or whatever, like the 80 million that GTA 5 is. I do not think Red Dead Redemption 2 is going to be able to hit that benchmark. But you need to hit that scale. But regardless, whatever game it is, whatever like big ass game, whether it's The Witcher 3, whether it's Assassin's Creed Odyssey, whether it's whatever, like some game that hasn't been announced yet, that is on this like ridiculous massive scale that's like trying to push the next boundary, like, at the end of the day, like, if you unionize, like, that would introduce new kinds of costs. It would, like, heavily affect how the development cycle would work. And maybe that would mean that, like, we wouldn't be able to get those games in that form. But, like, that just means that, like, we're already fucked. We're in the state of fuckedness right now with video games. Like, we're trying to move from a state of this is all fucked to a state of, like, this isn't fucked anymore. Like, the people making video games are getting the income and, like, have the benefits and have just, like, the luxury of being able to be, like, a normal human being with families and free time and hobbies and interests and being able to live a fucking normal human life. Like, that's the state we should be moving to. And if that means, and then also we should be moving to, like, the state of where, like, video game companies are not trying to, like, you know, like, reach into your pocket and pull out every last dime you have by using really predatory business models like a loot box or something. And, like, to move to that state, maybe that does mean, like, the price of video games has to be $80 or something like that. But there are other models, whether it's, like, you know, like, more basic, you know, like DLC expansions or smaller things that are low risk and low cost to produce because you're using existing like materials and existing assets in the game. Like, whatever it is, there are definitely other models and better models to do this and to make video games sustainable. And like, yeah, this Ubisoft thing, and especially all the fallout and everything around what's been happening with Telltale, makes it very clear that we need to move to that, and like, the video game industry needs to take, like, strong, hard steps to move away from where we are right now and to unionize and do what they need to do to support the people making these games, and then also, like, engage in business practices that do not utterly poison the well for your consumers, because that is where they were with the loot boxes last year.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my point is that, as you say, like, people are worried about, like, oh, are video games going to change if we pay people a living wage? Like, it's going to fall apart one way or the other. Like, either we do the right thing and we fix the industry and it becomes more stable, and maybe games change in a way you feel, maybe they don't, who knows? Or it's just going to fall apart. Like, that's the other part. Like, you're going to have massive brain drain of people who can't do this as a career. You know, you could have that. You could have just economic collapse of some of these studios, because if Ubisoft wants to make this the annualized way they do Assassin's Creed, they're going to go belly up. That's insane. That is completely unsustainable, right? Like, they're trying to make, like, The Witcher 3 every year. It's impossible. It's just fucking impossible. So, obviously there are models of how you can, you know, make a video game, make it of a good size, with the, you know, time and investment it takes to do it. And, you know, you generally see that more among, like, first-party developers who are kept closer to the vest and have more resources of a big, you know, multinational company. But not everyone's going to have those resources, so it's a complicated conversation. I think I'm really curious what happens to the price of video games, because I think that is one of the straws that is going to have to break in one direction or another. I don't know if the video game economy is going to accept moving beyond 60 for, you know, normal video game prices, because there's actually been a lot of effort just in recent years to pay less than that. Like, all the stuff that Amazon and Best Buy and GameStop were doing to, like, give you 20% off, you know, new games, in a recognition of, like, if you buy video games regularly, $60 is a steep fucking ask. It just is. You know, it's a lot of money.
But it's what game companies are already doing. Like, that's what the like, having 5 different versions is. Like, that is them seeing that it's, like, it's hard to sell raising the price of a $60 video game, so we're selling you some $60 version, but then we're also, like, clouding up the store with the $70 and the $80 and the $90 and the $100 and the $110 and the $120. It's just, like, there's so many different versions that, like,
but that's my question, want to have
their cake and eat it too.
Yeah, is it economically palatable to move the price up? You could argue that, well, they're already doing that. But I don't know, because it's also going to take the industry making the decision, right? Of just, like, on the new generation, like, we're going to $70 or $80. I think you could probably bump it up just $10, and then if everyone is buying it at that price, you don't have to sell a $100 version hoping that, like, 5% of the audience buys it. You know what I mean? Because you make it up in volume. So I'm sure there's a lot of discussions being had. I wonder if with all the special edition stuff, they've kind of fucked themselves on doing a hard just price raise, because would they do that and then still do all this other crap and just increase consumer distrust in the whole thing? It feels like a can of worms, and I'm not sure how it's going to get solved. It's crazy stuff.
It makes me think about, like, I wasn't following video games very closely, but I find this period of video games very interesting, which is that, like, around before, like, the PS2 stuff happened quite, it was like the Dreamcast, and that's where, you know, the price of video games was still in flux, but for different reasons than way back in the day when everything was on cartridges, the price of video games was in flux because it literally cost different amounts of money to manufacture different cartridges because they had different hardware in them. But then Sega had, I forget what the name of the sports series was, but it had like its own sort of first-party sports games that it put out on the Dreamcast, and they had a football game that they originally had like a license to use the NFL stuff. And they undercut Madden's price, I think by a lot. I think it was by like, they sold it for like $20-$30. And Madden got so sort of like aggressive about that they basically, to beat that, because Sega made what like people generally considered the better football game and sold it for cheaper because it was a first party game, they could get away with it basically. What EA and Madden did was they just went after the NFL license so hard that they pushed Sega out of it and got an exclusive license with the NFL, and nobody's going to buy a football game that doesn't have that fucking license. It's, you know, it's like buying a wrestling game that doesn't have WWE on it, or a hockey game that doesn't have NHL. It just doesn't make sense at some point. Or a baseball game that doesn't have MLB, which is what Sony has with MLB The Show. And so, like, that was one of the steps that was made to start normalizing the $50 then $60 price jumps. And then, like, Microsoft was one of those companies that had $50 games for a while, and then at the 360 they made the decision, like, we're going to level out at 60. And so it's been stable like that for such a long time that I wonder if this is going to open that, like, space for, like, weird pricing moves and kind of maneuvering like that that we were in a couple of generations ago. Like, it opens the chance for some, like, weird business stuff on that side of things.
Yeah, I feel like going back to the Red Dead 2 example, what if Rockstar had just made the decision, we're selling Red Dead 2 for $80? Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing that I actually could imagine shifting things, because they would have the weight to throw around of, like, you don't like it? Fuck it. You know, we're Rockstar. Like, we're going to do it, you know? And I feel like they probably could have gotten away with that, too, like, on an economic front, because it's a big enough game that enough people are going to play. And then I think you probably would have seen some people follow. I don't know what the game is that would be able to carry that weight if it's not like a Red Dead or a GTA or something like that, you know?
Yeah, because there's no there's no like Nintendo in the 80s or like Sony for like the PS1 or the PS2 that like has such a single-handed share of the market that like they can just push it, and not just share of the market, but like for like the number of consoles out there, but the number of first-party games out there, because so much stuff is so third-party driven these days for like the PS4, the Xbox, and the PC, that it's like I can't see like one of like Sony deciding that where they're going to like say like, oh, we're going to sell our games for $70, and like because it like market as like a prestige thing or something, because there's third parties I don't think would follow that kind of lead the way they would have in other market situations. So I'm with you. Like I think a huge third party game like a Red Dead would have to be the time that would happen, but it's not happening this time.
It's a Cold War kind of situation, right? Everyone is sort of pointing the gun at each other, but no one's firing. Like, if Sony decided to raise their price of games to $80 for the next generation, everyone at Xbox would be popping fucking champagne at the advertising opening that would have just opened for them of saying, well, we're keeping it at 60, and we're probably going to sell more consoles. And in that world, they probably do better, right? And Nintendo the same way. Nintendo would be over in Japan throwing a fucking costume party with all their characters, you know? And that's why no one's going to do it, because it's like a mutually assured destruction kind of thing, you know? So, yeah, it's a weird conversation, probably worth thinking about more, but I don't know, I've been thinking about it this week, so worth the chat.
Yep, it's been bubbling up all over the place for video games for a couple of years now. It's good to check in on it.
So, Sean, you want to talk some Doctor Who?
Let's talk about Doctor the Who, Jonathan. All
right. Doctor Who, Series 11, Episode 2, The Ghost Monument, written by Chris Chibnall, directed by Mark Tonderai, featuring our new cast led by Jodie Whittaker. Spoilers for the episode. We got a new TARDIS. We got a new theme song. We got some other new stuff. It was an episode of a lot of firsts. This kind of felt like the other half of the premiere in a lot of ways because, we don't actually have the Doctor with her companions in the TARDIS until the end of episode 2, so that kind of feels like, okay, now we're out on the adventure. But in another sense, it sort of followed the model that we've gotten in recent years of episode 1, we were on Earth, present day. Episode 2, we go into space. Episode 3, we saw from the preview, we're going to the past. So in some ways, it kind of fit that model. Yeah, what did you think of the Ghost Monument? You said you've kind of soured on it a little bit over the last couple hours, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts here.
Yeah, it's one where I definitely like it more than the premiere. I just think it's a much more solid episode. It doesn't have to do as much shit as obviously the premiere episode had to do of establishing, your 3 companion characters and your new version of the Doctor and what seems like is going to be the arc of the season with the Stinza, I think they're called, whatever the weird toothpaste
people. I will look
people.
it up.
Yeah, I've already forgotten an hour which maybe gives you an insight into my feelings on their potential as being like a season-long threat or something, which they because they touch on them again in this episode in a way I was not expecting. But yeah, anyways, so it doesn't have to, it's not as belabored as the first episode is, though it is still, as you said, is introducing some things like the theme song. Obviously, it has to introduce the TARDIS again at the end. And so since it doesn't have to do all those things, I really enjoyed the just normal Doctor Who-ness of it, which I think you kind of talked about at the top of this episode. It's just it just kind of gets to be a Doctor Who episode. It's a good little romp on an alien planet. And that side of it, and for most of it, and really after I watched it, initially I was yeah, that was a pretty solid episode of Doctor Who. Where I started to sour on it was this sense of the episode, and it's kind of something similar to what the woman who felt the Earth felt like. There's no real cumulative impact to the episode to me. And it just kind of feels like it goes off in a couple of different directions, and none of them really mean anything to one another. And it's like a decent adventure while you're on for the ride, but once you're off the ride, I just kind of almost forgot about stuff in the episode instantly is what it sort of felt like to me. Of that, there's I think probably the best example of where it feels like this episode is weirdly disjointed and non-cumulative is that at the end of the first act or whatever the episode, once you're on the planet and you kind of introduce the premise of it being a race between these two people, it's this race across the universe. The element of it being a race never comes up again other than when they finish the race. Nothing about the actual episode feels like it's a race between these two parties or normally what the episode this plot would be a race between those two people and then the Doctor and her companions being this third party that's suddenly entered it and being oh God, we have to win this race to get the TARDIS or whatever it is, because if we don't, the prize of the race is going to be the TARDIS. There's so many ways you could have rejiggered this episode to make the different pieces fit together, and it just feels like it never happened. And so sort of the whole middle portion of the episode, it's not at all about a race between these different people, which is what it was set up as. It is about the Doctor sort of wandering around and trying to solve this mystery. And then it the mystery is just sort of whatever, and it involves the Stinza people, and then the race thing kind of comes up again a little bit, and there's this very half-baked sort of theme about togetherness and friendship and needing other people, but that never feels like it's really developed through the mystery part of the episode. And so there are different ideas in the episode that feel decent on their own, but it is so just sort of sprawled and disparate to me that it made it very hard to hold on to this episode once I was done watching it.
I agree completely with all that. It's a case of squandered potential, because I think it's got a great opening. I like the first 5 or 6 minutes in space when they're crashing. One, it's outstandingly directed. It's got a really good, they do the whole thing with the Doctor and Yaz and the dude guest star who's completely forgettable on their ship in a big one long tracking shot sort of thing, which is really cool. They don't cut a lot. Once you get to the planet, this episode has a whole fucking can of worms of editorial problems that we'll talk about, like the premiere did. Both this and the premiere feel kind of like they needed to be 10 minutes longer, and at some point someone said, "Oh, we got to cut 10 minutes out of this. Throw it in a blender." I don't know. We'll talk about that later. It's a weird problem that I've never seen Doctor Who have in any form in the past, so that's weird to me. But where was I? Okay, the first 5 or 6 minutes I think are really fun. You get down to the planet. That's all really fun. You set up the premise. That's all really cool. And when they reveal, oh, the ghost monument is the TARDIS, which I was kind of expecting they were going to do. But when they do that, I'm like, okay, that's really neat. They're going to set up a cool, like, you know, a race. This is going to be like, it's a mad, 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 mad world, or around the world in 80 days or something. And the Doctor is going to have to race for her TARDIS with her new friends. That's a great premise for a Doctor Who episode. And it's a great premise for a new Doctor having to go find their TARDIS. It's really cool. And then, as you say, that's not the plot of the episode. Like, and again, I don't think the episode at any point becomes like actively bad. This is not super incompetent Doctor Who, but it definitely, it's like they have to get from point A to point B on the planet. Things happen. They're fairly typical Doctor Who things. I think some of it for me was just like, it's been, you know, a year plus since we had new Doctor Who episodes, and it was like, this is like the first kind of normal Doctor Who episode we've had since, you know, the end of Peter Capaldi's run, and it's been like, okay, cool, good, you know, it's fun new Doctor Who, but definitely, as you say, you start to think about it, it's unremarkable. The things that happen in the episode are not super memorable. I don't think it has anything super interesting to say about the companions. There are some interesting moments with the Doctor herself, but they feel like they're building up for whatever the season arc is going to be. I don't feel like I need the people with teeth in their face to be villains, but I don't know where that's going. And then it totally builds to the ending where the Doctor's like, you should work together, and they finally work together, and then they leave, and the Doctor is sad because the TARDIS isn't there, but then the TARDIS is there, and it's over. And I don't know. I don't know if this is just a function of these are the setup episodes to the new season, new Doctor, new creative team, and the actual plots of these episodes just kind of got put on the back burner in some way. I can understand that happening. That happens in some cases. And maybe, you know, next week, now that we're all settled, we'll start getting really good stories. Or I don't know if as all evidence points to, Chris Chibnall is just a lesser Doctor Who writer than Stephen Moffat or Russell T Davies were.
Yeah, like, and I think part of my more negative reaction to the episode sort of comes from I have, like, this weird, like, anxiety about this season of Doctor Who because there's, like, so much writing on it in so many ways, with this being the whole new team. There's, you know, the weird stuff of it being the first female Doctor, which, like, adds this other, like, weird component of, like, don't fuck this up kindness to it. And there's something about, like, I just need there to be this, like, home run knockout Doctor Who episode that, like, every Doctor Who season has, like, that one really great episode in it. I need that episode to happen because, like, I just need that anxiety lifted. It's like, I think it's a dumb anxiety to have. I'm not saying this is something that people should be feeling about the show, but it is something that, like, makes it that when you have this, and especially it's that it is written by Chris Chibnall, and this is 2 episodes in a row. And actually, I didn't know, because I'm sure that credit was in the opening titles, but I was too busy focusing on making sure that really there was no credit space this time, and there's not, and we need to talk about that. I didn't actually, like, pay attention to who the writer was, and I didn't know from, like, pre-release stuff I wasn't paying attention to that. So when at the end of the episode, the writer credit came up again, I noticed it, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. And that was a bad feeling to have about the showrunner of the show. Because Doctor Who is, you know, it is something we talked about a little bit on last week's episode of, like, that maybe they're trying to, like, make the visual component of the show more like a driving force and kind of like to make up for some stuff. But traditionally speaking, and I think you see it in this episode and the last episode, Doctor Who is such a writer-driven show. It's so driven by the script. It's so driven by the idea of the plot and by, like, the quality of the dialogue. And, like, you know, and being able to establish supporting characters well and have them bounce off companions and that kind of stuff. Like, that really meat and potato stuff of the script writing is so what, like, makes Doctor Who, and it's why, like, the celebrities behind the scenes of Doctor Who are always the writers. And people always talk about the great writers like Robert Holmes or Stephen Moffat and Russell T Davies. And
the way modern Who is set up, the showrunner will write the majority of episodes from here until they pass the baton. Like, that's... You know, Russell T Davies wrote at least half of the episodes in all his seasons. Stephen Moffat wrote at least half of the episodes in all his seasons. Chris Chibnall has the credit on these 2. He co-wrote the next one, and he wrote the 4th episode. I don't know when he will not have a credit this season. Those are the only 4 we have details on. So he will probably write, again, at least half. That's just how it's set up. That's how most TV shows are set up. So he, you know, it needs to hit a certain level at a certain point, yes. And this is only 2 episodes. I'm not in panic mode by any means yet, but I kind of feel the same anxiety. And I'll feel it more next week if we are still in this zone, because the first 2 episodes are generally, if you're in a rough patch, that's where you're going to get it, you know? Like, that's just generally, you know, where it'll come. Like, the Beast Below is not Stephen Moffat's best episode. That's the 11th Hour was great. The Beast Below is the one you kind of forget is there in season 5 of Doctor Who, right? This is not as good as The Beast Below. This is not as good as, I think, The End of the World, the second Chris Eccleston episode. This is not as good as New Earth, the second David Tennant episode. Like, none of those are great episodes of Doctor Who. I think they're all more interesting than this one.
Yeah, because I think one of the problems that we have with almost every single Chris Chibnall episode, I think for me, we'll maybe get into this again as you sort of hinted at, but for me, he wrote the Silurian 2-parter in season 5.
Oh,
to me, that's his,
those are his best ones, yes.
Those are his best ones, but they're his best ones because they are basically modernized versions of Doctor Who and the Silurian.
Yeah.
And so the core ideas of those 2 episodes, of like, and like the plot theme and like what they're exploring, is pulled straight from Doctor Who and the Silurians. And obviously, like, the character stuff is all different.
I never remember that he wrote those.
Because they're they're the outliers in his basically his writography or whatever it is for Doctor Who, and his script duties on Doctor Who. Those are the 2 episodes that, or like one episode since it's a 2-parter that really stands out. And both of these ones have had the same issues that I think Power 3 has some different stuff going on, but especially you can see it on Dinosaur on a Spaceship, which is a totally fun ride. But at the end of Dinosaur on a Spaceship, like, what the fuck was that episode about? Like, what was that episode?
It's about dinosaurs on a spaceship, Sean.
It's about running around on a spaceship, and there's dinosaurs, and then, like, and the thing that everyone forgets about Dinosaur on a Spaceship that I will never forget because it became a big joke on that episode when you talked about it, is that fucking episode ends with him shooting an old man the Doctor shooting an old man into space and blowing him up with missiles. That's the fucking conclusion of that story. And it's and that's like, that's not built up to in that story, and it's not dealt with in that story. It's just like, it was the resolution this is the only resolution kind of that could happen at that point in time. And it points to, I think, what is a recurring issue in Chris Chibnall's writing, which is the, like, plot structure and plot concept. Because it is something where it seems like he has almost a, like, Mark Gatiss-like element of, like, oh, I have this cool idea for a story, but he never kind of goes beyond that to, like, really building it up and structuring it. And I feel like you don't get the sense of the, like, what, you know, feels like a, like, average Stephen Moffat episode or an RTD episode that, like, you know, like, works. You feel that, like, he has had all these cool ideas and kind of, like, thrown them away and then built them back up and then, like, cut this off and then put this here and, like, gone through this, like, what feels like a heavy revision process to, like, really shape this idea into a full story and not just have it be this sort of sitting idea. And Chris Chibnall's episodes feel like he has a couple of these ideas that kind of sit in a plot that goes through a basic run of motions that doesn't really shape itself well. And you kind of can usually go along for the ride just fine because he has a pretty good ear for interactions between the Doctor and side characters and the companions. He's very good at the Doctor's voice. I think, like, both these episodes, you know, obviously Jodie Whittaker has proven that she's great at playing the Doctor, but then also Chris Chibnall has shown, again, that's, like, he's good at writing dialogue for the Doctor and, like, expressing that, and that's good. Like, you definitely need that, and that's not something that every writer has on Doctor Who. But, like, even more than that, first you need to be able to nail that basic, like, have a strong idea and know how to shape that idea in a plot that explores and expresses it interestingly. And that idea thing was what Stephen Moffat was best at. And he's, like, other than probably Robert Holmes, like, he's one of the best writers in the history of Doctor Who at that specific element, and that's what made his great episodes work so well. And that's the thing that gives me anxiety about this episode, is that it is another episode that has, like, that exact same problem. That at the end of the episode, what is this episode about, and how does it explore that idea? And it's like, it's about togetherness. How does it explore that idea? It has the 2 people hold hands at the end? Like, there's not much meat on that story, and that's very frustrating because that's, like, Doctor Who needs meat on those stories for it to really be able to thrive.
Yeah, I mean, this is his 7th episode. I just did the count. His 6th story overall, because the Silurian thing was a 2-parter. So it's a small sample size still, especially because we only have 2 of him now in this new role as showrunner. but it does feel like it does not feel like the Chris Chibnall we've gotten in these 2 episodes is appreciably different than the Chris Chibnall we got in former seasons of Doctor Who, and that was my worry going into it, because the Chris Chibnall we got in former seasons of Doctor Who is not the guy I would have chosen to be showrunner, based on that audition. But I didn't really worry about it because, who knows? He's done great work outside of Doctor Who. It's a completely different thing when he's the guy in charge than the guy writing scripts on commission. But this is not appreciably different. As you say, it has a lot of those same strengths and weaknesses. I'm really curious to see, especially once this settles into a normal Doctor Who rhythm, what episodes start to feel like, because again, there are some really good foundations here. Jodie Whittaker is so good. She's just so fucking good. Like, she's almost too good for these 2 episodes, in the same sense I said last week of, like, she's just so much the Doctor. And she just is that character, and you can see, like, every other Doctor rattling around in there, and it feels like we have not missed a beat going from 60-year-old Scotsman Peter Capaldi to, mid-30s woman Jodie Whittaker.
Yorkshire, I think, is where she's from.
Sorry, what? Yorkshire?
I think she's from Yorkshire.
Yeah, I was trying to remember it. That was my pause there.
Yeah.
Yes. Yorkshirean? I don't know how you say it. But yes, it feels like we haven't missed a beat there. And so she's great, and she's the Doctor, and she's kind of the Doctor we've always known and loved, just looks a little different now. But then you've got all these other new elements, and I'm not sure how they're working. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of what I mean by she's almost too good, is that, like, that part of it is so, like, clamped. They've got that on lock. I need to see if they've got the other parts on lock. Like, I need the companions to have a more full story where they're the focus. Like, I need to get to know these people better. I need to get to know what a story structure under Chris Chibnall is and if it can work. And again, I'm not saying none of these things can work. They certainly could in the future. This is only 2 episodes. It's a very, very small sample size.
Yeah.
But that is the feeling, is it's like, okay, they've more than proven me with the 13th Doctor. I was never really worried about that to begin with, but, like, that's fine. But, like, I can't tell you a goddamn thing about Yaz so far. She's there. Seems like a good actress. Seems like someone who would be a good Doctor Who companion. I just need her to have, like, lines and things, Graham, I really like as a character. He has great chemistry with the other characters, and I think especially with Jodie Whittaker, they play off each other very well. That was probably the biggest thing I got out of this episode. Ryan, I feel like I weirdly know less about after this episode, because he has the weird Call of Duty moment that, like, just kind of threw his character out of whack for me for, like, 5 minutes. Although... And then there's the thing with him climbing the ladder and the Doctor encouraging him to think about science, and I liked all of that because of how it's like it's her kind of like taking him under her wing. I really like that. I like the Doctor being kind of a proactive, friend here, but it kind of goes nowhere. Like, it helps them do the thing with the cigar, but this leads me to my other problem with this episode. This episode is 50 minutes long, longer than... They're all going to be 50 minutes now, but longer than Doctor Who has been in the Davies and Moffat era. And yet, it is fucking madcap. Like, it is just move. It, like, This is what I mean by editorial problems, is that it doesn't, like, do the basics of shot, reverse shot in a lot of places. It just has dialogue layered over scenes, and, like, they'll be running, and that's the visuals, and the soundtrack will be the characters having a conversation. And I just constantly, I was like, no, stop. Film the conversation. Like, point the camera at Jodie Whittaker, let her say her line. Point the camera at Tosin Cole or whoever else in the cast, let them say their line, and then do the running and shit. Like, if you do it all, like, you can do it all at once in a couple of places for dramatic effect if you want to show, like, this is high stakes. But that's like the whole episode, is it's all layered over each other. The episode is never slowing down to breathe. You need those moments for these things to kind of sink in. It's very confusingly edited, especially in the middle portion. It feels like they didn't have full coverage of some scenes. The blocking is weird. I don't know. Again, it feels like the kind of thing where maybe they did point the camera and get the line, and then they're like, this is running 55 minutes and we need to get it to run 50, so let's just layer the dialogue over itself, over other sequences. I don't know. Did you get the same feeling of, like, what was going on here?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. I don't think because I didn't with the first episode, I kind of went back and looked at some scenes to kind of like, because I don't have as good an eye for it as you do, because I don't have fucking degree in this shit, right? So, like, I need to kind of look at those scenes harder. And so I didn't go back and do it for this episode. But yes, now that you point it out, like, it is that middle stretch. And it's some of the same problems that the first episode had, both in the editing and in just like the pace thing of like, you kind of never slow down. And this is maybe like what it is for me, even when you do slow down, you don't slow down. And it's like, and especially, you never slow down with the Doctor, still. And that's something that has me, like, really frustrated, because Jodie Whittaker is so good, but, like, the Doctor, to me, is the most interesting in the moments where the Doctor has a chance to slow down. When the Doctor has to be madcap and is throwing out catchphrases, or not catchphrases, but, like, throwing out, like, hot lines and, like, little jokes, or, like, giving a big speech, those are all big necessary moments. And, you know, obviously, like, you need those to build the story, and the Doctor's a good character to do all those things. But where the Doctor as a character shines for me is it's usually, like, the first and last scene of the episode where they're just in the TARDIS or whatever and just chatting, you know? Like, that was Season 9 and Season 10 was so perfect at that with Peter Capaldi, where it was just like, you know, the last scene in the TARDIS or whatever with the Doctor and the companion was almost always like one of the best scenes of those episodes, because you just got a chance to slow down, unpack what was just happening, give these like incredibly talented actors like this great dialogue and this great space to just like really be their characters and live in that setting and live as those characters. And here, it feels like we just never have the space to stop and do that stuff. And it's very frustrating, because it feels like these actors can have that and can do that and would be fucking great at it. But this is 2 episodes and we still haven't done that yet. And it feels like we need to do that, because I feel like I don't know who any of these people are, because we've never like stopped and just sat with these people when they're not having to deal with like a life crisis, you know? They're constantly in a state of crisis, and that's not always the best mode to explore a character in.
If the next episode starts with them stepping out of the TARDIS and an alien shooting at them, I'm going to bang my fucking head against the wall. You know, like, I need the next episode to start with a good 3-4 minutes in the TARDIS of them, like, talking and being excited about the cool new alien spaceship they're in, and the Doctor talking about things. Like, we need that really badly at this point. So, yeah, I agree, like, you get that with the Doctor, and it's like they're layering these moments over each other. Like, the Doctor's heart-to-heart with Ryan in this episode is while they're climbing up a ladder, running away from alien robots trying to shoot them, you know? And it's like, that can work as a setup to a later heart-to-heart, but you've got to have the heart-to-heart, you know what I mean? Like, you've got to have the moment where the Doctor and Ryan actually talk about this stuff, and here it's, again, all hurried. It's not using close-ups. It's layered over visuals, so it's just this kind of cacophony, and I don't think it plays to really anyone's strengths. Like, luckily, Jodie Whittaker is very good at the, like, action side of the Doctor, of, like, she's a very commanding presence and is really fun in these scenes and has the right kind of energy for it, and I think that papers over some of the flaws. But we also, I've already seen, like, there haven't been a lot of slow moments. She's clearly going to be just as good in the smaller moments where the Doctor gets to, like, wax poetic about things at some point. But I want to see those. I want to see her talk to Ryan. I want to see the actor who plays Ryan, you know, stretch his legs. I want to see the actor who plays Graham get to stretch his legs a little more. You know, there's a brief scene between the two of them in this episode where they're talking about, you know, whether or not they're going to about Nan, and whether or not they're going to talk about that. And Graham has that line about, you know, I like to think about what she would say if she were here. That's a lovely little scene. It feels like it needs to be part of a larger tapestry for it to really hit home, you know, because if it's the only one in the episode, it doesn't leave as much of an impression.
Yeah, and one thing that's frustrating is that it's like, it's a lovely little scene that doesn't involve the Doctor and it doesn't involve Yaz. And it's like, I'm not saying that like all those kinds of scenes need to have all the characters involved, but when we haven't had those scenes with those other characters, like particularly Yaz has not had anything yet, which is like very frustrating.
Yaz had one line where she very clunkily, not the actor though, the writing very clunkily exposed on like what her home life is like, and she just was like, I live at home with my father and my sister who wants me to move out so she can have my room. And I'm like, okay, thanks, Yaz. I assume that's going to be important in a future episode, and that's why this line was clunkily added into the script.
Yeah. Yeah, and so and there are a couple of moments kind of like that with different characters where there's like weird, odd expositing, or like, I mean, some of I think the dialogue in the scene that they're kind of like trying to set up the Strinzo or whatever kind of feels this way. In a way that, like, I think is one of the reasons why I didn't realize it was a Chris Chibnall episode, is that those lines feel like lines the showrunner had to shove into a script at the last second, because, like, and you would see that, like in, like, season 6 of Doctor Who with Stephen Moffat, I think is a great example of this, where it's like, clearly, like, Stephen Moffat had, like, all these big complex ideas for what that season arc was going to be, and was probably rushed on production, because I think Doctor Who's always rushed on production, because it's, a big, complicated, weird TV show, and so it's like, you just had some of those moments which were not the most elegant moments Moffat had as a showrunner, where he would just, like, shove a scene in about, like, Amy's on-off pregnancy, or, like, Madame Kovarian just, like, entering the episode all of a sudden, that just felt like the person writing the rest of this script did not write these scenes, and didn't, not only did they not write these, like, they didn't touch those scenes, is what it felt like. It felt like once they were out of the process and the Stephen Moffat realized we need to shove this in, and that's what those lines felt like. If, like, Chris Chibnall realized, oh fuck, we really, like, Yaz's family comes up in a couple of episodes, and we need to establish that. Where can we do that in these episodes? Because maybe, like, the order was like different when they were originally writing the script or something. It's like, okay, we'll shove these in here. That's what it felt like. And then at the end of the episode, I realized, oh, this is his own episode, so it couldn't. I mean, it still could be that. Like, you can still write the episode and have that problem, but it's bad that you would write the episode and still have that problem.
Yeah, because, so, like, let's talk about that moment where they bring in the Stenza, I think is their name. I looked it up and I already forgot again, because it is not a memorable monster name. This is not the Daleks. But anyway, yes.
Yeah, the Torchwood rejects.
Yes, these Stenza Torchwood rejects. Anyway, so you bring up that the Stenza are there. This is also, like, the big scene where the Doctor is talking to the cloth people. Did they have a name? The floating cloth things? Okay, the floating cloth things, and they're, like, reading her mind. It's a really well-played scene by Jodie Whittaker, and I liked it. And it's kind of, that is pointing towards the, like, flash of, for lack of a better term, darkness that I mentioned last week of, like, ooh, what's something in the Doctor's psyche that they're not talking about? Because the Doctor's always got something like that going on, and we want to hear about that. And this was, like, it was tying back into that conversation from last week about family, like the Doctor's thinking about someone. This was the child of time or something the cloth person mentioned. If it weren't for the fact that this season is, like, super heavily steering away from, like, it's not doing any classic monsters. They've already said that. There's not going to be any Daleks this season, Cybermen, anything like that. They're doing a lot of things differently. I would say they're very clearly setting up they're going to do Susan at this point, because that sounds like what they're leaning in for, but I don't know.
It's just like, I feel like we've said they're setting up Susan like 500 times on this podcast over the years. Some mostly jokingly, sometimes like kind of half seriously, and like it sounds like when they're talking about, I think they call it the timeless child. I think when they're talking about that, it, like, yes, I immediately was like, oh, they're doing Susan, but they're not doing Susan. It's
just weird because we usually joke about it, and I don't actually think that. This is the one case where I've been like, if it's not that, then it's clearly a new character or something. Because if you have the Doctor in episode 1 asked about her family, and she says, they're not here anymore, but I carry them with me, every longtime fan is going to think Susan, because that's the only blood relation we know of the Doctor's, right?
Yeah, that's been on screen.
Yes, that's been on screen. And then in this episode, you do something about the timeless child. They even they use the word abandonment and, like, all this stuff. And it's like, that's the story of Susan, so that could be it. But yes, I don't know. It's probably not, because they never do it. I don't know. Maybe it's Jenny, the Doctor's daughter from that weird David Tennant episode.
Sure. Yes. David Tennant's wife.
Yes, Georgina or whatever Moffat.
Georgia Moffat. Yeah,
but different Moffat, and she's the daughter of
Peter Davison. Yes, it's a lot.
It's a
lot with that one.
It's not incestuous. It feels weirdly incestuous given all the Doctor Who staff relations.
Yeah. Because that moment is weird, but like it is like that was the moment where I was like, oh, we're kind of setting up. Because it's like, it's both darkness and then it's also mystery. Like, Doctor Who as a character is called Doctor Who for a reason. And it's like mystery in like the sort of like, it's darkness, not just because of the like emotional sense, but in the literal sense of like, you can't quite see this person. Like, you can't see into their head. You don't fully understand who they are or what they're doing because they're alien, because they haven't told you everything, because you don't know their fucking name. That's like such a core identity of the character. The show constantly goes through this process, which we saw recently in season 8 with Peter Capaldi, of having to sort of step back and be like, we need to do something to bring that mystery back to the character because we've been too open with them for too long. And so, yeah, that's definitely an element that I'm glad they put in there.
But that scene goes by so fast. That's my issue, is that, like, moments like that need to hang around for a little bit. And instead, we're jumping immediately into, we're going to burn them all, and then we're going to run some more. It's like, I need to feel a moment like that and not have it, because I had to rewind that scene. I missed lines. Like, it just went by so fast, I didn't catch all of it. Like, I don't like when that sort of things happens. I don't know. Like, I've seen some people online in reviews being like, "Oh, Doctor Who has like a slower pace now," and I'm like, "No, it doesn't. It's really weirdly fast paced." Like, I agree these episodes don't feel as like event heavy, but that's more because the writing is kind of all over the place, not because they've slowed the pace down. The paces, they're pedal to the metal on both these episodes. Let's leave classic Doctor Who out of the equation compared to last season Peter Capaldi, you know?
Oh yeah, like I think especially I'm with you that like because I haven't looked around much at some of the other fan response, so I've not seen the slow pace thing yet. But yeah, I think particularly each Peter Capaldi scene gets slower paced, but it's like not because like there's less happening in the episodes, but as you said, the episodes are sharper written to give you these empty spaces and like being able to do stuff and having the confidence of doing something like a Hellbent or Twice Upon a Time, which basically have no antagonists and all the conflict is internal in those episodes. It's that kind of stuff that like can help make a episode not feel slow paced, but feel like appropriately paced because like you're just with the story and with the characters and not interrupted by like dumb shit happening constantly. And these episodes, it feels like we're interrupted by dumb shit happening constantly, and that it's not connected to one another.
The comment I keep hearing is like, oh, clearly Chris Chibnall, because he's the Torchwood guy, he slows down for character scenes and has people talk to each other. And I'm like, no, these actually don't feel much like Torchwood at all. And the pacing is not that in any way. I would like that. That's not what they're doing. I always get the sense in reviews like that that's from people who don't watch Doctor Who regularly, which is fine. I just wish they would admit that and be like, instead of trying to compare it to episodes they didn't see, just, be honest about where they're coming from. If you're coming in new to Doctor Who, great. Happy to have you. You should come in whenever you want to come in. But, don't pretend you haven't seen the last 5 seasons or something,
So, one of the things of where I can sort of understand where that comment is coming from is that the show right now, with the aesthetic it has that we've seen with these 2 episodes, with, the more cinematic style and the kind of Broadchurchy stuff, has the aesthetic of and the affectations of a show that is much more slowly paced, like a Broadchurch that is, one of those sort of, slow burn kind of intense BBC dramas. Broadchurch was great at having that pace because that's what that show was. But so far between these 2 episodes of Doctor Who, it has the affectation of that and it has the style of that, but it doesn't have any of the substance of it because it doesn't actually have any of those scenes. It doesn't actually have that sort of strong, finger on the pulse of each character and this really strong confidence in cutting between different storylines and developing them separately that you need in that kind of slow burn drama that Broadchurch was. And I'm not saying that Doctor Who needs to become that. I was kind of hoping that because I think that would be really interesting if you went more in that direction with Doctor Who. It would be cool. But so far, this feels like you are taking the aesthetics of that, but not taking the actual plot structuring and character development that comes with those aesthetics that makes it actually synergize and work really well. So I can see that the show looks like a show that does that, but I do not think the show is actually doing that at all.
No. Frankly, I'm not sure what tone they're going for after these 2 episodes, because the way the 13th Doctor is written and the way Jodie Whittaker plays her, the 13th Doctor feels kind of like a character out of an old school adventure book or something, like the person who whisks you away on a fantastical adventure. And in that case, you would want the younger male protagonist like Ryan, who's he's not that young, but 19 or something, who's the gung ho oh my god, there's this fantastical world, and that's the sort of thing you're doing. But the show looks fairly kind of dark and grim. It's got some darker things going on in it. But that never really hits home because, it kind of did when the grandma died last week, but the way they did it was silly and weird. So, I don't know. If I just looked at Jodie Whittaker's performance, I would say the tone of this show should be a kind of actually much lighter version of Doctor Who than we've had in recent years. More of kind of, first-year Matt Smith kind of thing. When he's very much he's the guy who crawls out of the box and he's out of a children's story sort of thing, but that's not how they're playing it around her so much. Like, it's the whole way she's constantly talking. Like, I love this in these 2 episodes, legitimately, how she's always mentioning, like, if I just had my TARDIS. And I love the way Jodie Whittaker says TARDIS. And I love how everyone else in the scene clearly has no idea what the fuck she's talking about. And that great sense of, like, there's this crazy woman who keeps talking about her TARDIS. What is that? That's great, but they don't, I feel like, play that as whimsically as it should be. And then at the end, the payoff is like, oh, the TARDIS is real, and it's this weird police box thing. I don't know. I think that's the fun thing they were doing, but the tone doesn't quite support it.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you, and it's something of where, like, because there are moments in the show when I'm like really visually stricken by it between these 2 episodes, but there are also moments when I'm like really let down by the overall aesthetic, because I was hoping for something a lot more lively and colorful, which is what it felt like they were setting up from like some of the previews. And if like you think of like the way the show looked in that like one teaser, that like very like stylish teaser that like kind of slowed down time and looked at all the characters and stuff, and you just look at Jodie Whittaker's fucking costume and how she acts, and like she's this like explosion of sunshine every time she's on screen. Like, she is between these 2 episodes, it's like there's still a lot of stuff to do with this character so far. But like so far in these 2 episodes, she is just this explosion of sunshine, and she's so happy, she's so optimistic, she's so peppy. If you use the vocabulary of Dragon Quest XI in English, she's in the zone, to use my vocabulary. But she's just like smiles all the time. She does this thing I really like of where like she's always like thanking people and looking them in the eye, and she's like so focused on people in a way that feels like there's a little bit of David Tennant in there, but without all like the depressive side of it. Yes. And there's like definitely some Peter Davison in there.
She's David Tennant on his meds.
Yeah, she's David Tennant on his meds, or like a much more confident Peter Davison. Although she has a weird loss of faith or something at the end of this episode that comes out of nowhere that feels like kind of a Peter Davison thing, but like that was a part of his whole character, was like he's kind of like not as like suave as the other doctors and kind of is more shaken by things. But like generally speaking, she's so happy and enthusiastic and energetic and like so positive about everything all the time, and has this very like let's go team, like, you know, like you said, it reminded me of the sort of character archetype you're pointing to, of like the fairy tale sort of character that leads you on the adventure. She kind of reminds me of Mrs. Frizz from Magic School Bus. It's like
it's great.
She has that like we're all in this together, kids, and like let's go team and let's go have fun and explore whatever this is, right? She has that quality to her. But the rest of the show, other than in like some like really striking like big wide shots that show like these beautiful landscapes at interesting times of day that they have, generally speaking, it's like we've been to these like really dark locations, and we're like you know, down in these like weird basement areas or in these weird little hideouts with like chains all over the place, like in the last episode. And the opening theme, which I love the aesthetic of in an isolated sort of sense, is so grungy that it feels like very inappropriate for this version of the character. I think it's a rad opening theme. I love the callback to the old school visuals, but like it's so dark and like mysterious and grungy in a way that feels like if you're doing more of a William Hartnell-esque Doctor would work, because that's what those visuals were originally made for. But this character feels very inappropriate. And then the new TARDIS console area also has like this like really kind of low light, dark kind of look to it. That's like, I don't quite know what they're doing, if like those different production elements like mesh together with like the version of the character they're doing.
So yeah, I agree with all you said. And getting back to the visual question here, Sean, I'm actually completely unimpressed with the visuals in these 2 episodes. They're fine. Okay. They're good. I don't think they're anything particularly special. Like, I think cinematographically, the first episode did some interesting things. It looked fairly big budget, all that stuff. It had some good individual shots, some bad cutting maybe. This episode, I actually think, like, it had good production design here and there. It you know, looked its budget and all that, but I was not impressed by individual shots in this, and I actually think the way this director, Mark Tonderai, shot things was often, like, weird and wrong. There's, like, for most close-ups in this episode, I don't know if you noticed this, they're super tight. They're tight, and you have, like, the top and bottom cut off, and you're, like, eyes to, like, bottom of the mouth, if that. And it looks like a cropped version of the shot. Like, it looks like you've got the wider aspect ratio and those black bars are just covering something rather than they just shot wider. Because when you go wider, you shouldn't go that close in with a close-up unless you're trying to do something very dramatic with it, which is not really this episode's language. So that entire aesthetic just kind of confuses me. I think there's one very, very good use of a tight close-up with the Doctor at the end when she's inviting them into the TARDIS, and they say, there's no way we can all fit in that, and she says, well, come and see. And the way they go really close in on Jodie Whittaker there is great and effective, but when it's just the normal language of the episode, there's a lot of this where it's like, this just seems kind of at a loss of how to use this wider aspect ratio. It doesn't seem all that impressive. I agree there's like all this tonal dissonance between where the visuals are aiming at things, what Jodie Whittaker is doing as a performer, what Chris Chibnall's script is doing outside of the Doctor. I don't quite have a cohesive sense of what their take on Doctor Who is at a visual level too. And while people didn't talk about this nearly enough, I think Doctor Who became a really visually striking show over Stephen Moffat's run. And you have like all the Rachel Talalay episodes that are just huge triumphs of visual direction on TV, but I think, frankly, most of the Capaldi episodes were in that boat, no matter who was directing them, because I think they developed a real house style. Maybe they'll get there, but if the house style is just, we're going to try to make it look like a prestige Netflix drama, Doctor Who isn't a prestige Netflix drama. Stop it. You know?
Yeah, and on that, like, I think, because for me, the visuals, like, can impress in, like, there's, like, one shot or two shots in the episode. They're like, oh, that's a good looking, like, and again, it's, like, the big, wide landscape shot that, like, they shot on location somewhere and it looks cool because that place looks cool at that time of day. But, like, the thing I'm most disappointed at with the visuals is that there's, and it's such a change from what, like, the Matt Smith and especially the Peter Capaldi style was, which was such an interesting use of color. And that's always been the thing I loved so much about the Peter Capaldi days and years of the show, was they just like really went all in on this like really sort of like almost kind of poppy sci-fi visual aesthetic that like had all these like strong colors and you know, obviously sometimes you would have in like a Heaven Sent or Hellbent especially, they had like really strong natural coloring, which feels more like what these episodes are doing, but it was so striking because it was very different from the like hard metals or like the like bright sort of like, you know, blue lights that would shine in like the TARDIS set that Peter Capaldi had was the like, you know, exemplar of all of this because they could do so much interesting thing with the lighting and the colors with that set. And these two episodes so far have felt like very like, you know, shot in like a sort of an aesthetic of a Broadchurch kind of thing. And they like, it's like very natural landscapes, which can look nice, but it doesn't have the sort of like vibe to it and the energy and like the you know, bright, colorful language that the visual language that the Peter Capaldi years had really developed, especially in those Rachel Talalay episodes. And that's to me like a strong step back that I hope that they find more space, especially when they do more kind of exotic locations and more exotic ideas for episodes and are on space stations and in weird locations, because that's where a lot of this stuff can shine. I hope they find spaces to explore with that visual element more, because these two episodes have been mostly bland outside of a couple of nice little bits.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I would describe the color scheme of these two episodes as muted. Like, they're very muted in how they use color. This episode is desaturated in places. Like, I think she's got a great costume. I think it works really well in action in this episode, because I love the billowing trench coat, and the blue pants really, like, stand out, and the suspenders, and the rain. I love all of that. I don't know why you're putting it in a context of muted colors. Like, that's weird. It's like, what if you took the Sixth Doctor's costume and then did all the episodes in black and white? Like, what's the fucking purpose for that, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, it kind of confuses me on that level. So, let's talk about the TARDIS. I really like the scene getting into the TARDIS when it's, you hear it coming in, it's like, oh, we're going home again. The TARDIS is there, and she hears it, and she's saying, no, it's okay, you can come, and she, like, gets the sonic screwdriver out, and it's like she's, like, inviting, like, her dog back or something. I really loved that. I loved how Jodie Whittaker plays it when she gets right up against it, and is like, oh, you've done yourself up, and then saying, oh, but I don't have my key, though, I lost it, and the TARDIS opens for her. Just fucking heartwarming, and she plays that great. I just love the enthusiasm there, and I laughed very hard when she makes the TARDIS run and it like gives her a jammy Dodger or whatever that cookie was, and she just has this goofy grin, and I'm like, that was very funny. Not sure about the TARDIS console room itself. It looks like the grungier version of the David Tennant console room, and I'm not a fan of the David Tennant console room, so I'm not sure about that, but we'll see.
Yeah, for me, like, I basically agree with everything you said, and that I do like the scene on its own, and I think it's like, it's well acted, it's cool in its own right, but it's like, it feels like a scene that would have been in what we were kind of hypothesizing maybe this season was going to be, where you'd go like half of the season or something, like chasing after the TARDIS, and then you finally get there, as opposed to what feels like she hasn't seen the TARDIS in like 2 days or something. I know it's been longer because there's like a time thing at the end of the last episode, but we didn't really feel that time jump at all.
Because she didn't change her clothes.
Exactly. Yeah, we talked about that on the last episode. But it feels like I was like, oh, this would have been a really incredible scene if it had been such a journey to get to this TARDIS. But especially because the plot of the episode only touches on the objective of getting to the TARDIS a handful of times and is not like at its bones about that. At its bones, like really what this plot is about is the mystery of the planet and what happened to the people there with the Strinza. And like, I know that is like resolved within like a whole 20-minute chunk right in the middle of the episode, but that's what the fucking episode is really about. Somehow that's how it ends up. It feels like to me what the plot structure does. And so then at the end it's like, oh right, we're getting to the TARDIS, and I guess the TARDIS isn't here, and you have that moment where like Jodie Whittaker is crestfallen in a way that's like, why is this, like, this doctor has been so enthusiastic about everything. And I can see, like, in another version where it's been built up to and there's, like, a bigger context to it, I could see that the whole sequence being so powerful of, like, of seeing that maybe, like, the doctor has been forcing that confidence this whole time and like, it's like, and then finally getting right to the goal and have it slip through her fingers. It would make her be like, oh no, like I can't do this anymore, and then the companions have to build her up. What a great 5-episode arc that would have been. That
would have been great, I agree, yes.
Instead, it is like this weird thing shoved in at the end of the second episode, where it does not feel like, one, it does not ever feel like, oh, the TARDIS is gone, we've lost it, which is a thing that Doctor Who has done a couple of times very successfully. Obviously, like, it's never actually been gone, but like communicating this, like, you know, like just have like what happened to Bill in the sort of season finale 2-parter of season 10, where it's like she is separated from the TARDIS, and they're like, and you feel that, and it's like you are like the safety blanket of the TARDIS is ripped away from this character you really care about. Doctor Who has done that several times and it's worked really well. Here, I did not ever believe, like, even for a second, I didn't feel like, oh, the TARDIS is gone, we've missed our chance at it. They don't sell that at all, and it feels like this wasted good moment.
Going back to the 5-episode like arc thing, like, what if the arc was they keep thinking they're going to get to the TARDIS, they don't, they're following the Doctor because the Doctor promises, like, if we can get to my TARDIS, I can get you back home. And what if, like, at the end of that, it finally, like, slips through their fingers in some way where we believe that the Doctor has no more recourse to find the TARDIS, and then the companions had to build her back up, and it was based on not 2 episodes of knowing her, but 3 or 4 or 5, and being like, no, you know, you've gotten us out of every jam, and we know you're doing your best, and even if you don't, like, get us back home, like, we still like you. That would be a really powerful scene. It can't be a really powerful scene if these people have known each other for 2 hours of screen time, you know?
Yeah.
So
all of that is very frustrating because, like, the scene itself, like, I can see myself a year from now watching this scene when they upload it to, like, the Doctor Who YouTube channel. I'm like, oh, this is what a great scene. But when watching it in the context of this episode, it, like, just doesn't work for me that well. And then, yes, the TARDIS console is really weird, and we've only had a little scene with it. This is the only scene I went back and rewatched. And
me too, actually.
I watched it back. I took it off of my TV and watched it on my laptop so I could go frame by frame on my laptop player very easily. Because it's like, I need to find a good shot to actually, like, look at this thing and, like, really get a sense of it. Because that's what you do when you have a dumb fucking Doctor Who podcast. And you're like, oh, we need to talk about this. This is very important. It's the second most important thing. We're going to get back to credits face and the fact that it's not there. But the Doctor Who TARDIS aesthetic they're going for here is like, there are some ideas in there of, like, I think I like sort of the change they made to the roundels on the walls. I think that's, like, I could see that being good. There's some good things there. I like the little, like, lever she pulls that makes the little cracker come out of the cookie or whatever it is, and that's cool, and she reacts to that really well. I mean, I like the hourglass. Like, there's a lot of little doodads on the console itself that look cool, that kind of feel like the original Matt Smith TARDIS console that had just, like, all this weird shit, like hammers and, like, just doodads and like what looked like Pop-O-Matic board game bubbles on it and shit. You're like, I don't know how this works, and it just looks like it's sort of, like, put together like MacGyver made this fucking TARDIS console or something. And that element of it I like. but I immediately kind of had this sinking feeling in my chest of like, this looks like a hell set to shoot on because there's so much shit. It's so cluttered. There's like that little entrance hallway. I kind of like that the entrance is like boxed, like it's the like the police box itself. Like I think that's a cool idea. But once you get out of that, it's kind of a smaller space that then has a like big circled like caged thing that's like translucent, almost cage looking thing around the middle. That then within that there are 4 gigantic fucking crystal pillars that look like they got pulled off of like a set of a Power Rangers show that don't look like a Doctor Who thing to me at all. I hate the crystals. And then you have this big TARDIS console that doesn't have I forget what it's like the technical name of it is, but like the big thing that goes up and down in the middle of the TARDIS console that's always been kind of the mainstay, even if in some of them, like I think of the Peter Capaldi one, it was like the whole thing that went up and down was encased in glass all the way through. It still had that thing there. Instead, it's this gigantic, ugly looking, awkward crystal, and the whole thing has these like really harsh yellow lights on it, which looks a lot like the David Tennant one. And it just feels like such a dramatic step back from what Peter Capaldi had, which like almost any TARDIS design would, because Peter Capaldi had the best TARDIS. Like it just is. But for 2 reasons, or like for a couple of reasons, like probably several, but one of them being that it just seemed like it was such a great set to shoot on. And so many of the directors just had really interesting ways to use that set really powerfully. I rewatched a scene because it was still on my laptop, from the end of The Eaters of Light, which is the one where at the end of that episode, Missy is on the TARDIS and the Doctor and her have this like little heart-to-heart that's like this really like kind of tense scene between the two of them, of the Doctor kind of maybe deciding to trust her finally. And they shoot that scene in this little like lower position off to the side that gives it this like really interesting intimacy that is like just the two of them in this more enclosed space. And the TARDIS in the Peter Capaldi TARDIS console room had so many little areas like that if you shoot it over here, it gives it a very different feel. If you shoot it down here, they're very like tight and intimate. If you shoot it in the main TARDIS area, you have like all these fun little like circular camera movements you can do. And you know, we obviously need to see more done with this TARDIS console room to like really judge it. But so far, it just looks like there's so much stuff in the way and there's not a lot of variety in the location that I just don't see there being these like really interesting, dramatic, like visually compelling scenes in that TARDIS room. Like I can't envision, you know, Heaven Sent happening and the Doctor's like home space being that TARDIS room where he can do all this stuff. The other main issue I have with it is, and it's the thing that the Peter Capaldi TARDIS console room had perfectly, that I think a lot of the classic console rooms did really well also, is that when you were in there, it was a space that you could feel like people would hang out here. Like I could spend hours just like sitting around, like reading books, playing with the chalkboard in Peter Capaldi's console room or in the old classic TARDIS console rooms. They like feel comfy and warm and inviting. And this room with all the big crystals and the harsh lights and all the shit going on in it, it looks like you would like get a fucking headache if you stood in that room for more than 30 minutes. And that's like, I want a homey TARDIS space that feels like this is like our home. And when you start the episode here, you feel safe and feel comfortable. And when you end the episode here, you have returned to that safety and that sense of comfort. And hopefully we will get there with this TARDIS room. But like this episode, I just had the sense of like, again, it's like we've only seen it in this one episode, but it feels like I just don't see how this space could feel like that ever.
Yes. Ditto to all of that. I agree with it completely. For me, it's like, it's not open enough. It's the TARDIS is typically a big open 360-degree set where you can put people anywhere and you can sort of shoot anywhere. You can even like break the 180-degree rule in filmmaking a lot because it is a circular set where you understand the dimensions and it's big and warm and inviting. And like the Capaldi TARDIS plays with cooler colors. It's blues rather than like ambers or oranges or whites, but it's still a very like colorful, open, inviting set. This is dark. It's extremely low light. Like, it's even lower light than the David Tennant TARDIS. And the thing about the I should say the Eccleston Tennant TARDIS, because my thought on that was always that I actually think that TARDIS console in the RTD years fit Eccleston's Doctor perfectly in a lot of ways. Like, I think it kind of fit his personality, and that the Doctor is very dark and mysterious. And it felt like, especially once you got to, like, David Tennant's last season, it's like, this guy's happier and he has friends. Like, why has he kept his TARDIS so weird and, like, grunge, you know? Like, I always felt like that didn't fully reflect the David Tennant character. But it was also that with the kinds of cameras they had back then, the lower light of that TARDIS just didn't photograph well. This photographs fine because we have better digital camera technology, but I don't need the TARDIS to be a place where, like, they're having to shoot with low light. I want it to be bright and big and inviting, as you say. And then there's just the issue of, like, that does not look like the TARDIS console. This Doctor would walk in and say, I really like it. Yeah. It looks like this Doctor would say, my friends are coming. Could you brighten it up a little bit? Could you, like, make some room? Because when you get near the TARDIS console, what it looks like to me is that you've got, as you say, this cage. There's a big open circular space, but it's completely hidden in shadow, so no one's going to hang out there. And if you're in the console with the Doctor, it feels like you have to, like, crouch down and crawl in there, and, like, you know, you're kind of cramped. Extra weird when you have a 4-person TARDIS crew again. Like, you feel like you would want to make it bigger, not smaller. So, I don't know. I'm kind of confused by it. I don't understand it from, like, a logistical photographic angle. It feels like changing the TARDIS for the sake of changing the TARDIS, you know, instead of being like, and I don't know, it feels like there's a couple of those things in these first 2 episodes of, like, we're going to do this differently because we can do it differently and it's a new team. Like, so far I kind of think that about, like, the aspect ratio. I think that about some of the musical choices. I think that about this, and it's like, but your core is so good, and your core is so, like, she's just the Doctor, you know, like, let her be the Doctor. Let her come into her TARDIS and, like, dance around and do crazy things in there, because that's what the Doctor does in the TARDIS, you know?
Yeah, it's almost, like, more inexplicable because of how fundamentally Doctor-y Jodie Whittaker is. Yeah. You know, if this was, like, because I could kind of see this being like John Hurt as the War Doctor, having, like, this big, fucked up, weird TARDIS console where he's like, I'm not going to have these, like, nice polished glass tubes to, like, be my time rotor. That's what it's called. It's the time rotor in the middle of the console. Instead, I'm just going to have this massive, weird crystal that just feels like, he said, it's like changing something for the sake of changing something. It, like, kind of, like, looks like fucking Zordon from Power Rangers should be living in that thing. Like, it's just like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, it does legitimately kind of remind me of when, in the Power Rangers movie, when the Zordon, like, glass tube breaks and you see it's, like, all these weird crystals at the bottom with, like, this dude there. And, like, that's weird. Yeah. And it's just, like, it just doesn't communicate Doctor Who to me in a way that, like, could maybe be fine if the rest of the execution was backing that up, because, as we said time and time again, change is at the heart of this series. And, like, I'm fine with them changing shit. Like, they can change almost anything they want. There are very few things in Doctor Who that are precious. It's, well, like, for instance, the name, the theme song, but, like, other than that kind of stuff.
Well, for instance, like, we both like the Paul McGann TARDIS from the movie. It looks nothing like the other TARDIS sets.
Oh, yeah.
But it is the TARDIS because I think it retains the like, emotive, like, inviting qualities without necessarily mirroring the layout. I would have been totally fine with something like that.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm also concerned with this TARDIS, which is something I really feel about the Tennant TARDIS and kind of also about the first Matt Smith TARDIS, which I like quite a bit, but it's like, I feel like this TARDIS console room is going to feel really dated in, like, 5 years. It's going to feel like this is some weird artifact of, like, the late 2010s. We would never design something like this anymore, which is kind of what the first Matt Smith TARDIS feels like to me when I went back and rewatched all of that stuff last year. And stuff like the classic TARDIS room, the Paul McGann TARDIS is a good example of this, and then the Peter Capaldi one is a great example of this. They feel timeless. Mm-hmm. Like, it feels like you could, like, any character, any version of this character could be in one of those TARDIS console rooms because their designs are so unto themselves and fit so perfectly in, like, the heart of the show. And, you know, like, the Paul McGann one is cool because it's like this big fucking Victorian library, and that's so part of the aesthetic of the character in the show that, like, going back to, like, the, you know, the character of the original William Hartnell Doctor feels like a dude what would hang out in a fucking Victorian library. And so that stuff works so well when you have, like, this big dramatic weird crystal room thing going on. It's just like, this is going to look so weird 5 years from now. Like, it's just, you're going to come back to these episodes when they go back to a more sort of normal kind of technology, science labby looking TARDIS thing, which is what the core design really is rooted around. And you're going to look at this weird organic crystal thing and feel like this was, they said, change for change's sake, and you would never, nobody would ever make this TARDIS console in 2025 or whatever.
Yeah. So, who knows? Maybe it'll grow on us. Maybe not. I'm interested to see more, but... I'm curious how people are going to shoot on it, I guess is my biggest thing. Because I don't even know how you get a fucking camera in there for, like, something. Yeah,
I'm with you. That's my main concern, because they just got, like, particularly Rachel Talalay at some point was just, like, felt like she was in a director as, a kid in a candy shop with that set, because it's, like, so many incredible filming opportunities with what that set felt like it gave her. And just looking at this one, it's like, how would you shoot, like, so many angles are blocked off because there's so much shit in here. And as you said, you have 4 fucking characters to have to serve on this set. How are you ever going to do that?
Yeah. So we'll find out. Yeah. All right. Last thing we have to talk about today is the theme song. I think it's a great arrangement. I think the titles, I think it's a really cool design. I like the, like, it's like a modern version of the original William Hartnell thing with, like, the Rorschach kind of images billowing out. I like all the purpley kind of colors. But, nope, come on, we got the credits face back. It took a long time to get that credits face back. It took 7 seasons, and it's gone again. Jodie Whittaker deserves a credits face.
Especially because if you're ripping off the original Doctor Who theme design, like, obviously the original version didn't have it, but they did with Peter Patrick Troughton. They fucking put his face behind that smoke and had it all billow around, and it looked fucking rad and dope as shit. This is the, like, core design from whence the title's face was born. And how would you not, like, see this as this incredible opportunity to have all these incredible shapes change into Jodie Whittaker's face? And I know why, because they made it fucking super grungy looking. And it's like the idea of going back to that design and, like, what they've done with it and the arrangement is awesome, but it feels like it's for a much darker version of the character. And it's like, it feels like you should just, like, turn the brightness up a couple of notches on like, everything they've done with it. And then you could see the colors, like, exploding into her smiling face in the middle. And that would be amazing and awesome. But instead, it's, like, so dark and grungy and weird looking. It's just, like, it's awesome in like, with a lot of stuff that we've been talking about. It's awesome, like, on its own. In the context of what you're doing with all the other pieces, it feels like it's like a piece out of sorts. It's like, It's not supposed to fit here. It's like got another little, like, dongle on the top, and it does not fit into this spot in the puzzle.
Yeah, I'm probably a little more positive on it than you are in that sense. There's one other thing I really like that they've done. They finally, I don't know how this took 11 seasons, they brought the producer and director credit out of the diegesis of the episode and put it in the theme song, so that now we don't have the weird thing where Doctor Who episodes after the theme song have just 2 credits that run under the episode, which is produced by, directed by. That was always weird to me that those were the only 2 they did that way, and they didn't just put those in the theme song at some point. And then I love that they have those in the theme song, and then it does this really cool, like, the time thing gets, like, tighter and tighter, and then, like, smashes out to the title of the episode and the writer credit. That is stylish as fuck, and it's really cool, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, I like that a lot. One thing I'm curious about is if this episode is indicative of them doing away with cold opens, because this episode doesn't have a cold open. It goes right into the opening titles. And that's something that, like, it's not a big deal, but I am personally a big fan of the cold open.
Yeah,
I just always like that in TV shows. I think it's just cool because it gives you this big, awesome mic drop moment to transition into the opening theme. And I hope that this is not them just saying we're not going to do that, because that would feel weird.
Well, I mean, to be fair, Doctor Who normally does not have... I mean, in Classic Who, it never did cold opens.
No.
So that's a completely modern Who thing.
Yeah, but, like, Modern Who made it very good, and it was like, well, you don't have, like, just because it has precedence doesn't mean it's better. Yeah. It's like, I think that cold opens are rad, and if Classic Doctor Who had cold opens, it maybe would have been better.
Okay. Well, we'll see. The first time the original theme song was used in Rose, there was no cold open. So... it took them until the second time they used it, but this is so I don't know if maybe we'll see. That's all. We'll see.
Maybe the first episode is just an hour-long cold open. Maybe that's how we understand this now.
Yeah.
Because there was no opening title thing, there was no opening theme song to that episode, so this was the beginning of the episode.
You could cut that together with the existing sound design very easly. The way that episode just goes with a brrr, and then you could just do it in the theme song and have it be a long, cold open. Yes, I think that's a good idea.
There we go.
All right. So, are you like me at all worried about Doctor Who taking on the topic of Rosa Parks for an episode next week?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No.
I hope it's good. That fucking terrifies me because Doctor Who, has a horrible track record of doing, like, American culture on screen, which is fine. Yeah. I get it. I don't mind. It's often very funny. But they have not tried to do, like, American civil rights icons on screen before, So...
Yeah. This is the one that is co-written by Mallory Blackman, she's a female black writer working in the UK, and she's actually, like, I have not read any of her stuff, but she's fairly well regarded for some of the young adult novel stuff she's written, so that gives me some hope, but it's also, like, but she's not American, so, because I feel like that's the two things you probably need to hit to do this, is you should probably be African and American, right? And you have because it's, like, the American civil rights movement is such a, like, American story about America that, like, the idea of this British series, even if they have a black woman writing the episode, and I think also the director is black for that one. But, like, even that, like, it's good to have that representation. It's definitely better than having, like, just Chris Chibnall writing it on his own. That's for sure. But it's still, like, that's one of the areas where, like, my weird Doctor Who anxiety I've developed about this season, like, is kind of kicking up of, like, just don't fuck this up, guys. Please don't fuck this one up. Like, there are some episodes of Doctor Who that I'm totally fine with you fucking up. Don't fuck this one. Please don't fuck this one up.
Yes, I feel the same way. If they were doing this as, like, an old school pure historical, I would feel a little better. Adding in there's an alien plot behind Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement feels icky on the surface, but we'll see how they do it. It could be great.
Yeah. I'm really interested for that episode because it is the first one that is not just Chris Chibnall. Yeah. He's co-writing it. So,
and usually a co-writer credit on something like this means it was the person wrote it and the additions of the showrunner were significant enough. So it's going to be largely a Mallory Blackman episode, but yeah.
Yeah. So that will be really interesting. Then, like, I hope, that gives us a sense of, like, what the larger direction of this era of Doctor Who will be once we have, like, some fresh blood, like, making the episode and, like injecting their perspective into it, because that's going to be, like, the biggest test is, like, once we, like, isolate out the Chris Chibnall script factor, like, what is this version of Doctor Who really going to be like?
All right, well, we'll be here next week to talk all about it. I will be very tired because by the time you next hear me, I will have flown to California, presented at an academic conference, flown back to Colorado, seen my family. Maybe I'll say hi to you, Sean, and then I'll be flying back to Iowa and the next day doing this podcast remotely again. So we'll see how that goes.
That sounds like that will be very exhausting. I will also be very exhausted, but just because I will be in the corner praying, please, Doctor Who, don't fuck this one.